on the 4th, 5th, and 6th, indicating a low probability of civil disobedience.
What?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you were, and I'm not, but if you were conspiracy minded, you might think that certain agencies concluded there was likely to be chaos at the Capitol, and that served their political purposes, and so they let it happen, and they prevented you from stopping it.
You know, when you tie that into a number of other things that happen, and if you have them, I'd love to take you through some of the military stuff really quick.
And I hope you will at length. And can I just ask, I think most people don't understand that the U.S. military would have a role in a domestic political protest. Why would the U.S. military, which we pay to fight wars abroad, be involved in a protest in the United States?
So the way it would work is, like I said, through a program. A lot of times the military will come out, they'll do support for civil authorities, whether it's COVID response. They did it during the avian flu, but they'll also do it during civil disobedience. We've used them for, I've activated and sworn in hundreds, if not thousands, of National Guard troops for IMF World Bank, for inauguration. So we'll have them to help line the parade route, just to help us fortify the perimeter. We'll have, sometimes they'll have with their QRF, Quick Response Force, in reserve in case we need additional civil disturbance support. So that's how they'll kind of support law enforcement. So 340 were activated for traffic control and management of crowds around like metro stations, so they weren't backed up and stuff like that. Not for specific civil disobedience. So we knew we had National Guard in there. And the Defense Support for Civil Authorities program is, if we become overwhelmed, our backstop for law enforcement, and I used up all my resources, and I was overwhelmed, would have been the military, specifically the National Guard. So 209, I get approval to bring in the National Guard. Probably 210, 211. My first call, well, I've already called General Walker. Called General Walker at 1:51. I was like, I can't wait any freaking longer. I call him, I said, send me the National Guard as quick as you can. I'm going to get approval any minute, because he asked, so you have approval from the Capitol Police Board? And I said, I'll have approval any minute. Please just get them coming this way. So they're within eyesight. Shortly after 209, I talk to them. 2:34, I get a notification to get on the call with the United States Pentagon. I have to sell my request for the National Guard. I'm on the call with a Lieutenant General Piat, trying to make sure I have his name pronounced right, and a General Flynn is on the call. And it's mainly Piat that I'm speaking with. I get on the call, Mayor Bowes is on the call, Chief Conti's on the call, and I said, I need the National Guard immediately. This is an urgent situation. I still remember saying urgent twice. This is urgent. And they got to be looking at the same TVs I'm looking at. I need the National Guard immediately. You know what his response is? Don't like the optics of the National Guard on Capitol Hill. He goes, I would rather have your officers in the fight and we can backfill your officers somewhere else. I said, I don't have that option. All my officers are in the fight. He goes, I'm telling you, I don't like the option of the National Guard. I don't like the optics of the National Guard on the Hill. I said, sir, we're having our asses handed to us. This is life or death. I need assistance immediately. And I still remember, he said, my recommendation is not to support the request. And I still remember Robert Conti going, whoa, hold on. You're denying the chief of the Capitol Police? And he comes back and says, not that we're denying him. I just don't like the optics of the National Guard on Capitol Hill. And he goes, and he goes back to that again, I'd rather backfill your people. I said, sir, I don't have that option.
This sounds like a setup to me. I'm sorry, it does.
It gets better. So I beg, and he goes, well, I'm going to walk down the hall and, we'll talk to the Secretary of Defense or whoever he's going to talk to. Right then I get notification. So I'm still on the call. We have the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. And I said, we have shots fired. I still remember yelling over the phone. We have shots fired on the U.S. Capitol. Is that urgent enough for you now? Hang up the phone, because now I got to start making my notifications. I got to call the Sergeant Arms saying, hey, we got what looks like maybe a confirmed shooting. Do you know when the National Guard finally arrived? 6 p.m. 6 p.m. they're sworn in on post. Do you know those National Guard, the 150 to 180 that are within eyesight of the Capitol? You know what they do with them? They put them in vehicles, drive them around the Capitol back to the D.C. Armory. You know where the D.C. Armory is.
Oh, it's far away, yeah.
Washington,
yes.
White House is on one side, United States Capitol, D.C. Armory almost equidistant on the other
RFK
side.
Stadium.
Yeah, over by RFK Stadium. They drive them back then, and they send me in the evening troops.
Not really.
Can you frickin' believe it? No, that's real. That's real. And you know what else they do? While I'm begging for assistance, the Pentagon sending resources to generals' houses to protect their homes, but not me. So you begin to think, it seems a little conspiratorial. I can see where somebody, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, But I could see where people begin to go down that rabbit hole real quick.
That rabbit hole, I mean, I don't know what the other conclusion is. Because, look, under pressure, people make mistakes and make bad decisions. But you're describing a systematic denial of intelligence and then of support, defense, through a whole bunch of different agencies, a whole bunch of different people, all reaching the same baffling conclusion that we're not going to protect the Capitol.
Right. Multiple agencies with people with extensive experience, and you're getting this type of response. And when you look at the level of intelligence, it's baffling that nobody put anything out ahead of time.
Maybe it's not baffling. I mean, remember, this was the end of the Trump administration. A month, almost 2 months into a contested election. This is a politically charged moment with ramifications that we're now living through. But there's a lot at stake here. This is not just your average protest, correct?
Correct. There is.
Did you feel that? Did you feel a political vibe coming off these decisions at the time, or were you just so in your law enforcement?
Oh no, I was looking at the cameras that were surrounding me with my officers, the men and women of the Capitol Police and the other law enforcement agencies, in a fight for their life. All I wanted to do was get them resources. I hadn't even sat back and at that point started thinking about the political aspects of it.
I should say, just because this is our second conversation, and I feel like I know you at this point. You're not political. I mean, you were a beat cop who rose and became a chief of police, a very prominent one. And so, but you never, you weren't like working in politics on the side like a lot of these people.
No, and you'll find if you look through it, and I talk about it in the book, I try and be as apolitical as possible.
I can tell.
Because I think that is extremely important in the application of law. I'm a rule of law type of guy, but especially being in Washington, D.C. and special ops, we did demonstrations all the time, First Amendment activity. You have to be apolitical. You got to go in. It doesn't matter. You have a right to First Amendment freedom of speech. It doesn't matter if I agree with you or not, but I have to take an apolitical approach to provide you security. And I believe it's important. You don't need to know what the political leanings of a cop are that's stopping you on a traffic stop. You shouldn't. You should never know that. So I'll always be apolitical when it comes into law enforcement because that's how it has to be.
Amen. So by the time the National Guard actually show up at 6 p.m., they're not needed, correct? The
fight's over. So the whole time they were concerned about the optics of the National Guard showing up. They show up. I have an official swear them in as special police officers. They take them. They line them up with their shields. All the protesters are off. They line them up with their shields, and they take a couple of pictures for military magazines and stuff like that of them lined up with the Capitol in the background. The very optics they said they were so concerned about.
They took pictures for military magazines?
Think about it. You can look it up. You can look up on some of the, go online, look
like
up.
We're the heroes of January 6th?
Yeah, hey, we're the heroes of January, yeah. So, and I appreciate I come from a military family. I appreciate the men and women in military. And I will tell you, when they finally showed up, New Jersey State Police beat them to the Capitol before the D.C. National Guard arrived at the Capitol. I had D.C. National Guards, men and women, that were infuriated. They were so pissed off that they weren't allowed to respond. They were extremely upset.
Wait, cops drove from New Jersey
Yes,
before the National Guard could
Yes,
get from the Armory on Capitol Hill to the Capitol?
I'd put out a request, a mutual aid request that went all up and down the National Capital Region, went up to...
Why isn't this story everywhere?
I have no idea. General Walker even said, he called me up, he said, Steve, I felt so bad. I pulled up on the scene. He's the head of the D.C. National Guard. He said, I pulled up on the scene and the New Jersey State Police beat us to the Capitol. He said he wasn't allowed to go. He repeatedly wanted to go and the Pentagon wasn't allowing him.
And yet the Pentagon celebrated the guardsmen who showed up at 6 p.m. when everything was done as heroes. Meanwhile, they send other guardsmen to protect the homes of generals.
Yeah, they send other resources. I don't know if they're Guard or Pentagon Force Protection or what, but the kicker is this. The Department of Defense, and they interviewed me. I would have been interviewed by anybody because I'm telling the truth. They interviewed me. I provided them all my phone records. They were part of that, all the records. They put out a report saying the actions of the United States military was appropriate considering the circumstances.
Was appropriate?
It's online. Yeah, go look up the details.
No one apologized.
No one apologized. They said
no one was fired.
Their actions were appropriate. They had an emergency response authority under DISCA to respond immediately, and they didn't.
Do you think that the Pentagon was gathering intelligence before and during January 6th?
Well, when you look at the fact that, Million Miller specifically Milley was talking about locking down the city. He had to have some pretty damn concerning intelligence. That's a pretty big stretch for the government, for the military to talk about locking down the capital city and revoking First Amendment permit.
In a democracy, that would be a big step.
I mean, that's a big stretch.
It's close to a coup, actually.
Yeah,
At that
and
point.
then when you hear about some of the stuff he was getting online, and he was only talking to members of Congress, it raised a lot of concerns.
Does the Pentagon, does Defense Intelligence Agency have undercover intel operatives that you're aware of?
I have no idea, and I think it is important that since you bring up the intelligence, it's important for people to realize, again, as the United States Capitol Police, we're not part of the intelligence community, the technical IC. There's 18 agencies. 9 of those agencies are military agencies. So that gives you an idea of how heavily weighted.
Half of the IC is military.
Half of the IC is military. So,
but I think the average person imagines that military intelligence is not allowed constitutionally to function on American soil.
Yeah, you'd think, I don't know
we're not ruled by a
specifically.
junta.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the specifics, but you'd think
But
that it
in
would
your
be.
career, have you seen evidence that the half of the IC, half of those 18 intel agencies, the military ones, are working in the United States?
I've never received, in my times of doing special events, demonstrations, intel briefings, I've never received intel from the military. So it's always been, the DHS, FBI. It's always been those folks. Never anyone said, "Hey, we got this from military intelligence."
So, in the aftermath of January 6th, there's been a huge debate over to what extent, there were federal agents or people who are working in some way for federal agencies in the crowd. And the initial explanation was, well, none, and you're insane if you think that. You're Alex Jones, you're crazy. And then over the last couple of years, we've seen people in authority confirm, actually, yeah, there were a lot in the crowd that day. I mean, that's now a fact. Did you know that going in?
No.
No. So just for perspective, since you've been to a lot of these events, there's a huge a planned demonstration in Washington, D.C. Will there always be assets, agents, people working for federal agencies in the crowd in civilian clothes? There
always could be. And for like inaugurations, there would usually be some combined teams out there. One for communications, but just for situational awareness. So it wouldn't be surprising. 4th of July, different things like that, where we have threat pictures or concerning threat pictures.
And what does that look like? Does that mean FBI agents dressed in Dockers and tennis shoes trying to?
Well, it'd just be plain clothes. Plain clothes to blend in. So that wouldn't be unusual, and it'd be just standard police work. That'd be good police work. So coming into January 6th, and I talk about it in the book, with the fact that shortly after January 6th, I'm driving through Loudoun County. I just talked to somebody from the Hill, and I get a call from overseas, and it's press. I don't remember what it was. It's somebody from Great Britain, and they started asking me about feds in the crowd. And I was like, no, I would have been told. I said, no, we're getting word that there was feds in the crowd. And I said, no, I would have been told. I've got lots of friends with the Bureau. They all have my cell phone number. They would have told me. Thinking about that, and Jill Sanborn's testimony in 2021, where she said they were taking overt action to keep certain people from coming to January 6th to Washington, D.C. That's big for FBI to start taking overt action. I mean, that's not covert, overt. That's a big deal. Fast forward to February of this year, 2023, in the GAO report that says on January 3rd, the FBI was tracking 4 domestic terrorists that were talking about coming to Washington, D.C. The Washington Field Office, their AOR, Area of Responsibility. By January 6th, they were tracking 18 or 19, it's in the GAO report, domestic terrorists. So think about that. They have 18 or 19 domestic terrorists coming to this event. So of course they're going to have resources on them. And they're not, you're not going to be just putting one agent. You're going to have multiples. So it'd be multiple with that. And I don't know how many they actually had coming there. So that would be regular standard police work. So I wouldn't be surprised by that, but not to share that in the intelligence, that's concerning.
So, I mean, it seems like common sense suggests anyway that you would have to tell the chief of Capitol Police that, hey, we've got our guys in the crowd. Like, just because, I mean, you would want to know the difference, correct?
You would absolutely want to know the difference. And, deconfliction, you want to have things
right.
like that. A lot of the folks will already know there's a lot of standard procedures for ways you deconflict, so you don't have blue on blue type of situations. You'll have that. I will say this, and just really quick.
So that would just to, because you have perspective, that would be the conventional way the by the book way to do it. FBI would call you and say, hey, we're worried about people in the crowd, and we've got our guys there too. Here's who they are.
Yeah, so just to deconflict operations, they wouldn't necessarily call me. They might call my deputy chief that's in charge of my intel and their
but they would
people.
call Capitol Police.
You would coordinate. You coordinate with DC Police. You'd coordinate with Park Police. You'd coordinate with Secret Service, just so everyone kind of knew what was going on. And really quickly, I do want to say this. Nowhere do I want to imply or indicate that I feel that agents instigated this or in any way like that. I'm never saying that. I haven't said that. And a lot of these agencies came to my defense on January 6th, FBI,
Yes.
Secret Service, stuff like that. So I just want to make sure that's clear. But there would have been some coordination. And when you look at it and you think with the intelligence coming in, if you think there's 19 domestic terrorists coming to Washington, D.C., somehow that would have been included in some type of report. And when you look at the FBI's procedures, policies and procedures, and again, go online, the Attorney General's guidance for domestic operations of the FBI specifically says the FBI is to do an assessment which includes intelligence assessments of events that they're identifying as being the target of possible threats and possible violence. I think that would have been the United States Capitol on January 6th. Look through that document. I outlined it in the book and see all the repeated failure after failure after failure of their own procedures to start identifying intelligence and making the proper notifications.
So but it does raise, and I don't have the answer to this question, and I hope I don't ever pretend that I do, but it does raise questions about the behavior of some of the people in the crowd who were instigating others to break the law, and who weren't arrested. And, given our facial recognition software capabilities, hard to believe they can't be found. And I would specifically cite a man called Ray Epps, who's now a hero on the left and funded by the Democratic Party, et cetera. But take the politics out of it. What is that? Here you have a guy on camera repeatedly saying, we're going to the Capitol. And he's not in jail when people who didn't go into the Capitol are in jail? What do you make of that?
Again, that's something I actually addressed in the book. It's funny. There's a lot in here. So my concern with that, and I look at it from a chief of police point of view, is you have somebody that's down, and I believe he's right near the old executive office building on the 5th, the day before January 6th, talking to a group of people, talking about, we have to get into the building. We have to get in the building. And then the next day to see him at what's called the Pennsylvania Avenue Gate. It's one of the two fence lines I had down at the West Front. And he's there, and he clearly sees the banner, the metal crowd control barriers that are up with the signs saying restricted, so he knows that's a restricted area. And he's up there, and you see him lean in, and he whispers in somebody's ear, and he covers his mouth in such a way so you can't read his lips or anything. Whispers in somebody's ear, and that person moments later is attacking my officers. That's suspicious as hell to me. It raised a lot of concerns.
What is that?
And what's interesting is I believe...
and that's verified. The person into whose ear he whispered...
Yeah, I think if you watch the video, you see that, and that person immediately go and start pulling on the gate and start fighting with the officers. And what's interesting is I believe he went on 60 Minutes. And on 60 Minutes, what he said was he went up to the officer and he told that officer, these officers are on our side. Don't hurt these officers. I believe that was pretty much not verbatim. But don't hurt these officers. They're on our side. Don't hurt these officers. Well, if that's the case, why would you cover your mouth and not yell it to everybody? Because it didn't seem like that protester was the only one that was possibly going to be hurting the officers. You had a whole bunch of people next to him. Why wouldn't you tell it to the whole group?
I don't know. I know that Epps is being encouraged by partisan Democrats to sue people who raise these questions, but they're fair questions, and I'm going to raise them anyway. How, given that tape, could the January 6th committee defend Ray Epps, which they did? Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I'm having trouble answering that one. I don't know.
Interesting. How many how many federal agents, officers, assets, people connected with federal agencies do you think were in the crowd? Do we have any idea?
I really have no idea.
More or fewer than normal, would you say?
Well, if you have, again, going back to what I'm reading now in the GAO report with 19 domestic terrorists possibly coming in, I've never seen anything like that in Washington, D.C. So you may have a larger than usual presence.
Amazing. Who's Yogananda Pittman?
Yogananda Pittman was my assistant chief for intelligence and security.
Okay. So did she have the intelligence that you didn't have?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know?
I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. I
Well,
don't know.
good point.
I don't know what she had and what she didn't have, but I do know that when you look at it, and we immediately knew. I mean, anybody immediately knew. One of the first things you start thinking about is this an intelligence failure? So think about it. We go through January 6th. I was begging for the National Guard, refused before, refused during it. We get the Capitol under control. I get them to where they can go back into session, 7:30. They elect to go in at 8, and then the House goes in at 9. But nonetheless, so think about this. The very next day, less than 24 hours after we got control of the Capitol, Nancy Pelosi goes on national TV, blames the leadership at the top of Capitol Police, calls for my resignation on national TV, and then lies about me. Okay? The very next day, puts Yogananda Pittman as acting chief.
But Yogananda Pittman, you just described her as the head of intelligence for Capitol Police.
Correct.
So if there was an intelligence failure, which again doesn't seem like a failure, it seems very intentional to me, but if there was such a failure, she'd be responsible, correct? Or she'd be in the chain of responsibility anyway.
Well, I mean, she was the head of intelligence. So if there's an intelligence failure, my thing is, do a proper analysis. Why do a knee-jerk reaction? I mean, putting her in charge. I mean, she ended up getting a vote of no confidence, so she didn't get the position from the police officers because many were upset with what happened.
Where did she wind up?
Where is she now?
Yeah.
She's chief of police for the University of California, Berkeley.
Interesting. So right across from Nancy Pelosi's district.
That is correct,
in the
sir.
Bay Area.
That is correct.
So you just kind of take the Bay Bridge over there, and that's where she is now. What does that position pay? Do you know?
I think it pays pretty well. There was
pays extraordinarily well.
I'm sure it pays. I'm sure it pays pretty good. It's interesting. There was a hearing just recently that was on TV. You can look at it, where the chief of police, Tom Manger, was asked about her position. It turns out that she was given some type of a secret leave so she could start her job on February 1st as the chief of police and not retire from the Capitol Police for months later.
Oh, so you should get the benefits.
Yeah, think about that. Yeah. It appears to be against departmental policy, and nobody allegedly was told.
What you're saying is that the head of intelligence for the Capitol Police, which demonstrably didn't have the intelligence it needed to protect the building, that person was first elevated to acting chief of Capitol Police and then given a very high-paying job right across from Nancy Pelosi's district at the University of California, Berkeley.
That is correct. And I will say this.
So that looks like a reward to me.
Well, I do know that the unit had significant intelligence. And I know many people within the unit were pushing that intelligence up to the leadership of the unit. So I do know that. Many of them became whistleblowers, and many of them were punished and forced to resign. Yep.
This looks like a scam.
I mean,
saying.
It just gets more convoluted. I feel so bad for the men and women in the police department, what they went through. I feel so bad for the intelligence analysts and what they went through. Many of them, it was really, really bad. I feel bad for the officials that were either demoted, forced to resign over this, forced to retire early. There's a lot of people that need someone. I think an outside entity needs to come in and do some investigation about what went on with.
We've had many entities doing investigations. Yeah. I believe we impaneled this committee or commission, this body of members of Congress that went on for about a year and was on the news every single night. Did they address any of these questions?
No, sir.
How could you have a January 6th commission whose job it is to figure out what happened on January 6th, not get to the bottom of why the head of intelligence at Capitol Police didn't pass on the intelligence, why the chief of Capitol Police was kept in the dark and denied support from the U.S. military, why Yogananda Pittman wound up, after failing on January 6th, getting a high-paying job right across from Nancy Pelosi's district? Who wouldn't ask these questions?
Yeah, well, I know there's people on the Hill still trying to ask those questions, and hopefully they can get answers. But it looks like they keep running into roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. But it's hard to believe 2.5 years later, we're still at this point. I still think somebody along the line is going to find, the smoking gun, the missing puzzle piece, and put this together. But it does. When you look at it, and there's still so much more to it, it just begins to raise more and more questions.
It's interesting to talk to you because, this is just my assessment, but you seem like a very straight arrow guy.
I try.
Well, it comes off you in waves. So, and I mean that as a compliment, but Like how long did it take you to realize there's something very strange going on here?
I knew there was something strange going on pretty soon. When I was running into the issues with them not wanting me to testify, I was like, this starts getting a little weird. And then when I started sitting down and talking to officers and getting information, and finding out from some of the intelligence that was out there and where it was, and seeing some of the emails of the intelligence analysts pushing it up to their officials, I knew something was fishy. I mean, think about it. How can somebody not look at all this and think something's odd?
So, I mean, we have a media whose job it is to get to the bottom of questions like these, or at least to ask the questions of knowledgeable people with relevant experience, and you're at the top of that list. We interviewed you, never aired, at a previous job, but how many other long interviews have you done with media outlets?
Long ones, not very many. I actually can't think of any. I've done 60 Minutes. That's probably about the longest.
And how long, from your 60 Minutes interview, how much of your account wound up on television, do you think? Estimate.
3 or 4 minutes.
3 or 4 minutes. 3 or 4 minutes. So you're the chief of Capitol Police on January 6th. Common sense suggests you'd be the first person that any reporter trying to figure out what happened on January 6th would call.
You'd think.
Is your cell phone buzzing day and night from
No.
curious reporters trying to find the truth?
No, it's calmed down. I mean, the first couple of days were something else, but it's really calmed down. And I'm not stupid when it comes to law enforcement. I've been in law enforcement for 30 years. I've done everything from capturing homicide suspects to doing, barricade situations. This didn't have to happen. This was screwed up from the get-go. Didn't have to happen. Numerous opportunities to prevent it from happening. Numerous opportunities from preventing my men and women from going through what they had to, and it never happened. There was never that opportunity to stop that train.
There's always a concern that politics will infect law enforcement and the justice system more broadly. And I think you've thought about this. It's one of the reasons I think you said we need to be strictly apolitical in the way we administer law enforcement. It does seem like things have changed. And it does seem like politics affect the way we enforce the law. Does it feel that way to you?
Yeah, and again, that's one of the things many things that are in here. I talk about the 2020 riots versus the January 6th attack.
The riots in front of the White House where famously St. John's Church was set on fire.
Oh, White House, across the country. I talk about the White House, and I talk about an agency that was formed by Congress specifically for the protection of the United States president, the Washington, D.C. Police Department. The White House is under attack, and they are prevented. They are prevented. I know it's not from Chief Newsom. It's from his, he was the chief at the time. It would have been from above him. They're prevented from going on White House grounds and helping the United States Secret Service with defending the White House. So think about that.
Who made that decision?
Again, all I know is, Newsom's hands were tied. So Mayor Bowser, higher? I don't know. But think about that.
Somebody told there was real rioting. In fact, I think that more officers were injured at that riot than were injured on January 6th, I think.
Yep. Again, don't take my word, GAO report. More officers injured at the protests up by the White House than on January 6th. And I'm told by Park Police, all charges were dropped, according to the fighting at Lafayette Park and at the White House. There were Secret Service agents bloodied and battered over there. There was a number of federal agencies that were hurt. Structures set on fire. They tried to light the Hay Adams Hotel on fire that was occupied. Think about that. Charges dropped. No such situation. I mean, when you look at the disparity of how justice is being applied, again, that's scary. That becomes really scary when it becomes politicized like that, and that's what appears to have happened.
I mean, it sounds like Trump is the key to all of this. If Trump hadn't been the president, responses would have been very different, don't you think? I mean, if Barack Obama had been president, do you think that someone would have told MPD, the Washington, D.C. Police Department, they couldn't protect the White House?
Again, I protect the White House. I see what you're saying there. I don't know. I mean, I think not.
Look, I mean, it's a hypothetical. I shouldn't ask you to answer hypothetical questions, but it seems amazing. Last question. Thank you for doing this again. I really appreciate it. This is important, and I hope that everyone who's interested in January 6th and its aftermath, which really has changed the country, will watch this interview. But looking back after spending your entire life in law enforcement, how have your views changed after January 6th?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, my views of law enforcement, I still think law enforcement is a very honorable profession. I really, really do. I think it's being screwed up in a lot of cities. I feel bad for a lot of people that are going into it. We need good cops, but right now their hands are being tied. When you look at what law enforcement's going on, I mean, I was just talking with somebody who, one of their officers in Washington, D.C. arrested somebody, went to a scene of a robbery, recovered a weapon, recovered somebody else's wallet in possession with the suspect, made the arrest, papered a gun, went in the person's pocket, and during the search found a loaded handgun, went down to papers, no paper. No paper, armed robbery. Means all charges were dropped. That's bad. That's bad when we're seeing the type of crime that we're seeing in some of these cities and they're not prosecuting some of these cases. I feel sorry for the officers. It's very dangerous for them. I still love the profession, still love the officers with the Capitol Police, Washington, D.C. Police, still talk to them regularly. They're going through a lot, and I just don't think they're getting the backing they need.
No, they're not. And the effects on the rest of us are
right, we're seeing it.
Stephen Sund, former chief of Capitol Police, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me on, sir.
Tucker Carlson, tonight, you often hear people say you can't have a country without borders. You can't have a country if you don't have borders. But that's also true of airspace, which is itself a kind of border. So maintaining control of the skies over the United States, deciding who comes in and out and on what terms, that's one of the most basic duties of the Pentagon and has been since aviation began. If you were to fly your Cessna into restricted airspace in parts of this country, the U.S. military would scramble jets and they might shoot you down. So it's not a small infraction. Unless, of course, you happen to be the Chinese government and you're operating an enormous white dirigible designed to spy on American nuclear installations. In that case, you could relax. You've got friends at the White House. Absolutely nothing is going to happen to you. Now, that's not an imaginary scenario. We're not guessing. We know it's true because we're seeing it right now. As you've doubtless heard, an enormous spy balloon the size of several school buses has floated over from central China. It's currently, we think, drifting across the continental United States. Yesterday, it passed over Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. That's one of only 3 places in this country that houses Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles. By this afternoon, the Chinese spy balloon had made it to Kansas City. And there, over the skies of that city, a pilot flying a private plane at 47,000 feet came close to hitting the Chinese spy balloon. Derelict balloon adrift, he said, in a notice to other nearby pilots. But it was not a derelict balloon. It was a balloon being controlled by China. In other words, here we have a foreign military aircraft over our country, spying on our critical defense installations and posing a threat to civilian aviation. That seems like a big deal. If you want to know how big a deal, consider how would we respond if Putin were doing this? If this were a Russian spy balloon? Well, you'd have the world's shortest news story. Russian spy balloon spotted offshore. Entire U.S. Air Force mobilized. Balloon reduced to vapor in seconds. So no, there would not be a lot of debate about what to do about a Russian spy balloon. We'd kill it instantly, as you would any hostile foreign intrusion. But things turn out to be a little different when it's a Chinese spy balloon. As far as we know, Vladimir Putin has never sent cash to Joe Biden's crackhead son. He probably should have. That would have been a very wise investment in retrospect. The Chinese government, long thinking as always, did send cash to Joe Biden's crackhead son, and apparently to Joe Biden himself. And that paid off. Watch some robot from the Pentagon tell you that you have no right to know anything about this Chinese spy balloon. You think you're a citizen or something? Here it is.
Position of the balloon classified?
Phil, right now, what we're not going to do is get into a hour-by-hour location of the balloon. Again, we're monitoring it closely. As I mentioned, right now, it's over the center of the continental United States. That's about as specific as I'm going to get.
But I understand it might be inconvenient, but does the public not have a right to know if a balloon is over their state?
The public certainly has the ability to look up in the sky and see where the balloon is.
The public has the right to look at the sky. Go stare at the sun. That's what the guy just said. What you didn't hear was a lecture about how the Chinese military is a threat to our democracy and our American way of life. It's not like the Chinese invaded Ukraine. No, just our country. So no big deal. Stop asking questions. Joe Biden, of course, took that very same position today. Watch.
Remember what the economy was like when I got here? Jobs were hemorrhaging. Inflation was rising. We weren't manufacturing a damn thing here. We were in real economic difficulty. That's why I don't.
Notice the calm smiles. Walk this way, Mr. President. They knew they weren't going to answer questions on that. And it raises a much bigger question, which is why? What's going on here? What else do they know but refuse to tell us? Well, today, Pentagon sources conceded that the Biden administration has actually been tracking this Chinese spy balloon for months since it left China. That means they watched it float over the Pacific, they watched it pass over the Aleutian Islands and into American airspace. And at any time, they could have shot it down over the water, by the way, risking no life on the ground. But they didn't do that. Why didn't they do that? No one will say. Instead, the trusty Pentagon robot offered this explanation. This is one of the dumbest explanations ever articulated from a podium in Washington. Here it is.
You said that this is violating our airspace, so why not take it down?
We assessed that it does not pose a risk to people on the ground as it currently is traversing the continental United States. And so out of an abundance of caution, cognizant of the potential impact to civilians on the ground from a debris field, right now we're going to continue to monitor and review options.
So the U.S. military is in fact protecting you by letting a Chinese spy balloon hover over our nuclear facilities. That is, in total, an insultingly ridiculous series of sentences. They make no sense. But the administration's position on the Chinese spy balloon becomes not just ridiculous, but scary when you learn that this is not the first Chinese spy balloon. Other Chinese spy balloons have flown over this country, and the Pentagon didn't shoot them down either. Now, you probably didn't know that because nobody told the public about it. The existence of those Chinese spy balloons was classified. Apparently, it still is classified. Joe Biden's Pentagon briefers didn't say a word about it today, as you just saw. And by the way, it's not just Chinese spy balloons over this country, it's many other countries. Nearly identical Chinese spy balloons have been dispatched by the Chinese military into the airspace of Japan and India and the Philippines, and in at least one case, probably all cases, at least one we know of, over a military installation. So Chinese spy balloons are actually kind of expensive to make, and there's a diplomatic risk in deploying them over other people's airspaces. We're seeing that happen now. So you don't do this on a whim. Hey, let's send spy balloons over the United States. You do it for a reason. The question is, what's the reason? We're going to try to get to the bottom of it if we can. We're joined now by someone who's paid a lot of attention to surveillance. His name is Nicholas Chalian. He's the former chief software officer of the U.S. Air Force. Mr. Chalian, thank you so much for coming on. What do you think is going on here? What's your best guess?
Well, you've seen effectively the biggest experiment from China, where they first of all got probably a very high rate of high-definition pictures of those sites, right? And keep in mind that the balloon is at 60,000 feet, so they're able to get better pictures, higher-definition pictures of the sites. Of course, the balloon is also much slower than a low-orbit satellite. Additionally, you've seen the ability for China to understand how quickly we're able to detect the balloon and also respond to it, and also take some insight when it comes to our electronic warfare capabilities. And finally, of course, you've seen China getting some insight when it comes to the ability to understand how the leadership at the Pentagon and the White House are able to respond to this.
Well, that's, I think, your last point is a particularly interesting one. So you have to know when you launch a spy balloon the size of several school buses that someone's going to see it. And so then you're going to find out if the country has the will to resist your incursion into their airspace. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, but it's also interesting, right, because I don't think they were trying to hide the balloon, so they were probably trying to test us more than anything else and trying to see how quickly we're able to respond and also see what kind of capabilities we have when it comes to electronic warfare, because that's also the ability for us to hide some of the data they're trying to gather when it comes to flying over the Air Force Base.
As we said a minute ago, and it has not been widely reported in the U.S. press, but balloons of this kind from China have been spotted over a bunch of different countries. We're getting a report right now, as we're speaking, that one has been seen tonight over Latin America, somewhere in Latin America. Does that surprise you?
It's not surprising. Obviously, we know they have multiple instances of these balloon activity. In fact, there was other use cases over U.S. territory as well. So this is not even the first time this happens over the United States.
Amazing. Nicholas Elliott, thank you so much for coming on site and that perspective. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So as we said, this Chinese spy balloon came to the attention of most Americans yesterday when it was spotted flying over the state of Montana, a military base, a base with intercontinental ballistic missiles. Now, the Pentagon did not inform the governor of Montana about it until after the balloon was over Montana. So, of course, they would have known because they've been tracking it since it left China, but they didn't tell Greg Gianforte, who is the governor of that state and reputed to be, we can't say we don't live there, one of the best governors in the country. We're happy to have him join us tonight. Governor, thank you for coming on. They knew it was coming over your state. You're the chief executive of your state. Why didn't anyone tell you, do you think?
Well, when I got briefed, this slow-moving balloon was hundreds of miles into Montana. It had already flown near the Air Force Base and the ICBM silos. When I finally got informed it was over our most populous city, it got spotted by a photographer at the airport.
Well, that's bizarre. I mean, that suggests deception. Of course, if you're the federal government, you alert state governments. You're the head of your state government when something like this happens. Do you have any sense what the backstory could be here?
You know, I don't. I just know, Tucker, if it was up to Montanans, this thing would have been taken out of the sky the moment it entered our sovereign airspace. And it clearly had been there for a while. It's not moving that fast.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a 308 does not extend to 60,000 feet. So you really need some kind of missile. Why do you think? So, I mean, that's really the question. From your perspective, it's a pretty clear case of we know what to do next. Shoot it down. Why do you think they didn't?
Well, I'm not sure. Initially, in the briefing I got earlier in the week, they were contemplating taking it out of the sky. For whatever reason, they didn't do that. Now, clearly, this went to the president's desk. He was given options. For whatever reason, he chose not to act. And unfortunately, the result of that is that Americans are endangered and our enemies are emboldened.
Amazing. Governor, I hate to pull random video off the internet and ask you to respond to it, but this is going around. It appears to be, it's on social media, video of an explosion over your state showing what looks like a smoke trail into the sky. We can't even guess as to what this is. Do you have any information about this?
Not at this point. I was notified of it just minutes before we came on the air. We're monitoring the situation. I'm talking to our National Guard to find out if they have additional information. I'm sure I'll be briefed here in the next hour.
Last question. The explanation from, as I know you heard, the administration is we didn't shoot this down over Montana because we feared the wreckage would hurt people on the ground in Montana. But I hear you saying as the governor of Montana, you would have shot it down. So that's not a concern that would have prevented you from acting.
Well, Tucker, you've been to Montana.
Yeah,
Eastern Montana is probably one of the best places to take it down. Yeah. We could have contained it. We could have found out what the mission truly was by recovering whatever electronics are on this balloon. Again, if the Americans had flown a spy balloon over China, do you think it'd still be in the air? Of course not. We should have taken action. Unfortunately, we've emboldened our enemy today.
That is exactly right. And it's such a smart point. Governor, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure.
You probably live in a nice place among reasonable people who believe the science and aren't tormented by deep neuroses that twist their behavior into unrecognizable shapes. You probably don't see a lot of people wearing masks outside. But that means you don't live in an affluent neighborhood in California where people are still all about masks, not because they're afraid of COVID, please, but because masked servants mean, well, powerful masters. You remember Nancy Pelosi's fundraiser in Napa, all the servants told to cover their faces, peasant. Well, Michael Oxford is not a peasant or a serf. He is a man with self-respect, a working man. He was installing smart home equipment in Pacific Heights, the neighborhood in San Francisco where Nancy Pelosi lives, and he was told he had to wear a mask while working. Well, because he respects himself, he refused, so he was fired for not wearing a mask. Oxford recorded this video in his car right after.
So, I just got fired. I got fired for refusing to wear a mask. Yeah. February of 2023. I got fired for refusing to wear a mask. They basically told me that we need to separate if I'm not willing to comply with policies. And I told them that I'm not quitting. And they were dumbfounded when I told them that I'm not willing to wear a mask anymore. And they then changed their story, and apparently it is a fireable policy because I have been terminated.
Not willing to wear a mask or bind his feet, for that matter, or kowtow. A man with self-respect. We wanted to talk to him. We tracked down Michael Oxford. He joins us now with his lawyer, Tracy Henderson. Thanks to you both for coming on tonight. First to you, Michael. Tell us what was going through your mind when they said, servant, wear a mask.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Tucker.
Of course.
The first thing going through my mind was, well, am I really going to put my foot down here? And I just decided to, and I didn't think it was going to turn into me getting fired and then me ending up on Tucker Carlson. But apparently that's all you need to do to be different around this crazy part of California is just say, I'm not going to wear a mask. That's how brainwashed everyone is.
No, it's totally true. And if you're at Mount Shasta or the Trinity Alps or in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley, you probably wouldn't get asked to wear a mask. Is that your guess?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. So it's in Pacific Heights. Tracy, I have to ask you: can you fire someone for not wearing a mask or being obedient enough or licking your feet or doing the things they want you to do in Pacific Heights? Is that allowed in California?
No, Tucker. No, and you know, it's the greatest hoax in California history. There never was a legal mandate. And any employer that thinks there was and that they can mandate an experimental medical product is a fascist. The California Department of Public Health guidance never went through the Administrative Procedures Act. So no, you can't fire somebody for doing this. Absolutely not. And what Michael did, your viewers need to hear this, Tucker. What Michael did is what we all should have done in California when this whole scamdemic began, not comply.
You're making me want to move back to the state, both of you. I thank you for what you did. Michael, I have to ask you, how did you feel? So, I mean, California, I was there yesterday, $5.50 a gallon for gasoline. So you need to make money just to live there. Everything's expensive. Yeah. You just gave up income. Did you feel good about it or not?
Chrysler, I drive a 79 Chrysler. I don't feel good about it at all.
Yeah.
It's not great on gas. Yeah.
No, it's not.
No.
But did you feel that it was worth losing the money to make the statement?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, if everybody that's a tradesman decided I'm not doing this anymore, work would stop getting done.
Yep.
And everything would change. Look what the truckers in Canada did.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. We'll find out who the essential employees are, and I hope they will start doing it. Michael and Tracy, you've really made my night. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having us, Tucker.
Thank you, Tucker.
Thank you. So as we said, the people who are really into masks, particularly outside, I mean, most of them went to college. They all went to college. They'll tell you all about it. Dylan's at Bowdoin. Oh, so impressed. So they know enough. They can read. They're not worried about COVID. Why are they still doing it? Well, we have science that bears on that question. A new study out of South Korea has found that people who are physically unattractive are more likely to keep wearing face masks in the post-COVID era. And on a possibly, indeed certainly related note, here is the audience in Stephen Colbert's studio the other night.
I come to you tonight breathing easy because the White House has finally announced they plan to end the COVID public health emergency in May. Take that, COVID. We beat you. Shove that up your nose and rotate it 5 times. This has been a long time coming. I wish you could see the smiles on the faces of my audience. And I wish I could too, because they're still wearing masks.
Imagine laughing at the least funny comic in America. You'd have to be a SEAL, not a Navy SEAL. Dagan McDowell is the co-anchor of The Bottom Line on Fox Business Network and a very smart person. We're happy to have her tonight. Dagan, thanks so much for coming on. So maybe this answers the question. You thought these people were neurotic. Maybe they're just hideous.
Possibly. But see, I think this speaks, if you wear a mask, and are a healthy person, it speaks more about what's wrong with you on the inside. Right. Than what's wrong with you on the outside.
Well, that's
it
right.
says that you are an insufferable, humorless scold. It says, I am an ardent Stephen Colbert fan. That they make you to go into that theater, at least this week, you have to be fully vaccinated and wear a mask to go into that theater because, and it's on the guidelines, it says if the community risk level is medium or high in New York County, you also have to wear a mask. And I love the fact that there are people in the audience wearing particularly cloth masks, which do not work. And again, the question of whether these masks work at all. But on this note, in South Korea, where this study was done, they just lifted the mandate for indoor mask wearing in South Korea. But there's some arguments to be made for wearing a mask occasionally. You know what? You got a cold sore, maybe I want to wear a mask.
Sure.
Or if you've got some janky teeth and you put a mask on, and if somebody's going to look at your mall and say, "Ooh, Boris Johnson," when they see your teeth, then maybe you do want to wear a mask occasionally. But
I reserve masks for when I get rhinoplasty, when I rob liquor stores, and when I join Antifa riots. But other than that, I feel like they're not necessary at all.
No. But if somebody dragged me to see Stephen Colbert, I would choose to take a nap on the sidewalk before I would go into that theater wearing a mask. And oh, by the way, when you wear a mask all the time, you get styes and cysts on your eyes because of the bacteria, and it causes your oil glands to overactivate. Just a little tip for the audience tonight.
That's
Tucker.
repulsive. I wonder what the myocarditis rate is in his audience. I bet it's high, just a guess. Dagan McDowell, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Great to see you.
So if you think speech is under attack, you don't know the half of it. Biden's Justice Department is trying to send a man for prison for a long time who made fun of Hillary Clinton on Twitter. And that man, all things being equal, will go to prison for mocking Hillary Clinton. That is now a crime. It should not be a crime. One of the most outrageous violations of civil rights in our modern history. That man's attorney joins us next to explain what's happening. So almost no one was paying attention to the early actions in the Biden administration. Biden gets inaugurated, and the media spend the next year talking about how great Biden is. So very few people noticed that just a week after the presidential inauguration in January of 2021, Biden's FBI arrested a 31-year-old man from Vermont called Douglas Mackey. Now, according to the DOJ, in the charging documents, Mackey's crime was making fun of Hillary Clinton on the internet. 4 years before he was arrested, Mackey made an internet meme joking that it was possible to vote for Hillary Clinton by text message. Not a single person in America, and DOJ has not shown differently, believed that Mackey was serious or that you could vote for Hillary by text message. He wasn't subverting democracy. He was calling Hillary voters stupid. And the DOJ knows that. Every person knows that. Jokes are not crimes. But the Biden administration is trying to send Douglas Mackey to prison for years. We've been trying for a year to speak to one of his lawyers because this is one of the great outrages of this story. James Lawrence is one of Douglas Mackey's lawyers, and we're happy to have him on tonight. Mr. Lawrence, thank you so much for coming on. This is such an obvious violation of the First Amendment. This is so clearly totalitarian. How did it get to this point in the court system?
Well, first of all, thanks, Tucker, for having me on to discuss this important case. And as we've argued in court filings, we believe that this prosecution represents a significant escalation of the government's regulation of speech under the banner of policing so-called disinformation. And Tucker, really, you were one of the first public figures and one of the most prominent people to criticize Twitter for deplatforming people over so-called disinformation. But I don't think even you would have thought that someone would face a federal prosecution or potential jail time over alleged memes. Now, here's what's at issue. The government says that this case is about voting rights, but as we've argued, the government has not alleged that a single person didn't vote as a result of the alleged memes. So we think that this case goes to the core of the First Amendment, and really, regardless of what you think about the content at issue, everyone in this country, Tucker, left, right, center, and every political persuasion in between should be concerned about what's happening in this case. And so the question is, what can you do? And there are two things I'd like to let your audience know about. First, Douglas Mackey's Legal Defense Fund can be supported by logging on to memedefensefund.com. And second, and really most importantly, Tucker, we're asking your audience to pray. Pray for Doug, pray for the defense team, pray for justice to be done. As for Doug, I can tell you, Tucker, he has great faith in God. He also has faith in our system of trial by jury, which our founders gave to us in the Bill of Rights. I can also tell you, for me, it's a privilege to be on his defense team.
Wait, may I say, I just want to make one thing completely clear. You've said it, I've said it, but I just want to restate it. The Biden administration has not held up a single victim of this so-called crime, this joke. So if there's no victim, how is it a crime? I'm confused. But you're the lawyer.
Well, the government's position is that merely the conspiracy and the intent to interfere with one's right to vote is enough under the statute at issue in this case. And of course, if the government's theory is allowed to prevail, the Pandora's box that could be opened with respect to the chilling effect on speech, it just can't be really overstated. Any speech, we contend, Tucker, that could potentially land someone facing a criminal investigation and looking at potential jail time. We can't open this Pandora's box. The defense team in this case is committed to slamming the door shut on this theory.
Hillary Clinton should stand up right now in defense of Douglas Mackey. This is being done in her name. You don't want to live in a country where politicians can throw you in jail for criticizing them. That's not a free country. No one's covering this because, oh, Mackey's a bad guy. I don't care. I don't care if he's Stalin. No American citizen can be treated this way. Period.
That's right.
I really do appreciate your coming on tonight. And by the way, he doesn't sound like a bad guy, but whatever, it doesn't matter, in my opinion. Thank you, James, very much.
That's right. That's right, Tucker. Thank you.
Liberals said the problem with women's sports is they didn't have enough funding. There weren't enough women's sports. Now liberals are telling you the problem with women's sports is there are too many women in them. Aren't enough dudes dressed like women. This time they're going after female shot put. The international sports body called World Athletics is considering letting men compete against women in shot put. Amelia Strickler is one of the best female shot putters in the world, British shot put champion, though she's American. She joins us tonight to respond. Sure appreciate your coming on tonight. Very few athletes feel like addressing this in public. You're the exception, so we're grateful for that. What's your response to this?
I think a lot of people are really reluctant to, address this and really stick up for women's sport just because they have contracts, sponsors. I know for a fact people's agents have told them not to speak on it to risk, any kind of, tag of homophobic to them. And it's certainly not about that. It's just about protecting women's sport.
Of course. Well, of course, there's nothing by definition homophobic about wanting women's sports for women. How do people you compete with? I mean, the shot putting world's got to be pretty small. You're at the top of it. You must know everybody. What's their view, other female shot putters?
Everyone I personally have spoken to completely agrees. We need to protect the women's category. Anyone who wants to identify as a woman, by all means, please do sport. But we just have to protect the women's category, so it's not, biological males taking those records, taking those medals, sponsorships, etc. We have to, keep it for women.
Of all sports, shot put seems like one you should reserve for men and women because it's an upper body strength sport, of course, to some extent. Bone structure matters, muscle mass matters. What would happen if men were allowed to compete in shot put?
I personally think we would see, a new world record. The shot put world record currently already has a lot of stigma attached to potential doping, so it would be, quite a big deal to have a new world record when we're still so far away from it.
Yeah, so it would make the sport less legitimate. It sounds like what you're saying.
Yes, I believe so, and obviously taking, countless opportunities away from other women who, have worked so hard to be there.
Yeah. Well, Amelia, I really am grateful that you were willing to come on tonight. I know it risks your reputation at least, but it's important. So thank you very much.
No, yes, thank you for having me. It is so important to me and so many women globally, so not a problem at all.
Amen. Thanks. Good Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. On Saturday, the 21st of January, American intel services watched, maybe slack-jawed, as a white helium balloon with an enormous payload swinging beneath it lifted off from central China and began to float east over the North Pacific on the way here to the United States. Within a week, it had arrived. On January 28th, the balloon entered U.S. airspace over Alaska. From there, it traveled over the Northwest Territories of Canada, and then it dropped back into the United States over Idaho. By last Wednesday, February 1st, it was spotted by civilians in the skies over southern Montana. A man staring out of the window of an office building in Billings saw what he thought was a UFO. It was too small to be a moon, he said, and so he began to take pictures, which soon appeared on social media. And then almost immediately, the airspace over Billings, over the entire town, was shut down. Commercial flights were diverted. F-22 Raptors arrived from a nearby Air Force base, along with refueling tankers and an AWACS surveillance plane. It was a big story. So it was at this point when the existence of an unauthorized Chinese military aircraft over the continental United States became impossible to hide or deny. At that point, officials around Joe Biden finally decided to tell him about it. Now, we don't know Joe Biden's reaction to this news, but we do know his response. Biden did nothing. He did not order the balloon shot down. He did not call for sanctions or punishment of any kind against the Chinese government that sent it. It was not until this weekend, when the aircraft had traversed the entire United States, including at least one classified nuclear weapons installation, that an Air Force jet finally pierced it with a Sidewinder missile off the coast of South Carolina. Debris was still fluttering toward the ocean when the administration began telling lies, many of them, about what had happened. That balloon posed no threat to American national security, the Biden administration claimed. Why? Because the balloon never transmitted data back to China. Now, how could officials know that? They never explained. Nor did they say whether the Chinese military would send one of its aircraft all the way to the U.S. without a satellite uplink. Apparently, the Chinese just forgot. They're not very good at technology. It was a nonsensical claim, but as far as we know, not a single reporter in Washington pressed the administration to explain that claim, and that's not really surprising. Reporters in Washington no longer dig, they transcribe. And what they transcribe next is almost enough to make you cynical about the role of the press in a free society. It turns out, and we learned this from unnamed officials on background, that allowing Chinese military aircraft to surveil your country, including your missile silos, is not the big deal the rest of us thought it was. In fact, it's routine. It happens all the time. Trump did it too. Quite a bit of it, actually. At least 3 Chinese spy balloons flew over this country while Donald Trump was president, and despite the anti-China rhetoric, he just let them pass. You didn't know that. Now you do, so settle down. This is normal. In other words, everything Donald Trump did while president is bad, except this, letting Chinese spy balloons fly over the country. That's very good. And we're taking a lesson from him. So virtually every news organization in this country repeated that claim, including some who should know better. And of course, as soon as credulous reporters wrote their dishonest stories, the Democratic Party and the television stations it controls repeated those stories as fact, which was the whole point. Watch.
They are saying we should have shot down the balloon the minute we saw it. I would use 2 words in answering these GOP criticisms. They are premature and they are political.
This is why we voted for Joe Biden, because imagine if this had happened under Donald Trump.
The way in which the balloon was taken down allows us to retrieve the parts of the balloon to see what was actually in there.
I'm just glad that there was no damage or threat to U.S. aviation operations, and that this operation took place, was done in a very effective, excellent way.
Some of the statements from the Republicans, especially in the Senate, have just been asinine, and these jackasses going out again, I'll get my shotgun, I'm going to shoot down the balloon. Seriously, they make clowns of themselves.
So the balloon shut down the airspace over Billings, Montana, including the airport. And as it moved east, commercial pilots said they were afraid of it. They were afraid of hitting it. So it's funny to see the transportation secretary, who's in charge of all of this, tell us it posed no threat to transportation. But the best is the dismissal of anyone who has concerns. It's those Republicans again with their moonshine and their shotguns and their extra chromosomes, thinking it's okay to shoot down Chinese spy balloons, when every sophisticated person knows, Donald Trump himself knew, the best way to handle Chinese spy balloons, let them pass. Again, just like Trump did. Trump, he's good all of a sudden. So the question is, did Donald Trump let Chinese military aircraft float over the United States unmolested while he was president? Well, someone asked him. He says he didn't. In fact, in an interview yesterday, Trump said he had no idea there were any Chinese spy balloons over the United States when he was president. And he seemed to mean it. But it wasn't just Trump. Trump's former national security advisor said the same thing. He said he'd never heard anything about Chinese spy balloons over the country. And you would think that he would have heard. Then the general in charge of NORAD, Glenn Van Herk, had the very same reaction. Quote, "It's my responsibility to detect threats to North America. I will tell you that we did not detect those threats." So somehow NORAD, the most sophisticated, supposedly, monitoring system in the world, missed those Chinese spy balloons too, 3 of them. And by the way, so did the director of national intelligence, the man whose job it is to know America's secrets. He said he'd never heard of Chinese spy balloons over the country during the Trump administration. Here's former DNI John Radcliffe.
Do you remember during the Trump administration when photographers on the ground and commercial airline pilots were talking about a spy balloon over the United States that people could look up and see even with the naked eye, and that a media that hated Donald Trump wasn't reporting? I don't remember that either because it didn't happen.
It didn't happen, said the former director of national intelligence. You can see why he thinks that. So again, according to media accounts, at least one of these 3 Trump-era Chinese spy balloons floated all the way to Texas in the center of the country. And yet inside the U.S. government at the very highest levels, no one seemed to know that it happened. Well, how could that have occurred, really? Well, the Biden administration had an answer. Speaking on background to its shills in the media, unnamed officials explained that these Chinese spy flights were actually never reported to President Trump or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or even to the Secretary of Defense. Why weren't they reported? Because they weren't important enough. They were, quote, relatively minor territorial incursions. Okay, so a Chinese military aircraft hovering over Texas, more than 1,000 miles from the Pacific Ocean, is a minor territorial incursion. That's what they said. It's pure absurdity. But once again, no reporter in Washington pushed back. They just repeated the lie. And then without warning, the White House changed its talking point, undermining the first lie. Actually, they explained today, nobody knew that Chinese spy balloons were floating over America during the Trump administration. We didn't know. We just found out pretty recently. Watch the smarter but more dishonest White House spokesman spin that tale.
I can tell you that we discovered these flights after we came into office. I'm not going to get into the specifics of how we did the forensics. I think you can understand that we're going to be careful about that.
They're not going to get into the specifics of the forensics. Oh, the forensics. But the one thing they were really shocked by when they took control of the U.S. government was how soft on China Trump was. They had no idea. He was letting these Chinese spy flights go over. They were shocked as anyone would be. That's what they're saying. Now, of course, once again, they can't say more because it's classified. Wish we could. Sorry. So what is the real story here? Honestly, we don't know. The Pentagon ignored our many questions today. Of course they did, because we're not going to transcribe them. So once again, the people who owe you the truth are lying to you. So all tonight we know with certainty is that the Chinese military just flew an aircraft that reportedly contained explosives over the entire length of the United States and got away with it. That seems like a bad precedent. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida thinks it may be a bad precedent. He joins us tonight. Senator, thanks so much for coming on. Why all the lying about this, and what do you think is actually going on?
Well, I can tell you they're categorically lying. They're misleading people, okay? The fact that a balloon, these balloons that the Chinese have been innovating for a while, they've used them a couple times to circumvent the globe and the like. There were pictures posted on Twitter about it, but they have never, ever crossed the entire continental United States, flying over places like where Strategic Command is based. These balloons, look, a couple things people are wondering about. Number one, in that space between where satellites operate and where a spy plane could operate, in that zone, these things become very useful, especially if you have a lot of them, which is what it seems like the Chinese are trying to innovate. What do they have on them? The ability to take in real time video, high-resolution photographs, potentially as well capture electronic communications, and they can loiter. That's the advantage. It's cheap. You're not looking for them because they move very slowly, and they can loiter over a period of time. So imagine in the middle of a war, one of these things in the Pacific, being able to take real-time footage, real-time, and feed it back of what's going on the ground and what's going on in the sea and so forth. So, but the notion that somehow this has been happening all along, it's just not true. I mean, because people were spotting this thing with the naked eye. I mean, they were seeing it, they were calling in, they had to warn people in South Carolina not to try to shoot them down on their own, because they were visible to people. They're just being dishonest with no reason. Well, the reason being is I think that they were caught off guard and did not respond appropriately, and now they're scrambling for answers and to deflect blame.
I mean, the Pentagon shouldn't be lying to us, right? I mean, a lot of Americans, I put myself in this category, always admired the U.S. military, but if they become a political instrument for an administration, and they seem like they are, some of their leaders are, I mean, that seems like a disfigurement of the military, and it's very discouraging to watch.
Well, and it's also, in many cases, as you've already pointed out, these unnamed sources that go off the record and leak out these little pieces of information. So we don't know if they're political appointees or civilians or someone just trying to climb up the chain of command and be promoted. But at the end of the day, we're losing focus on the fundamental issue here, and that is that the Chinese continue to develop and innovate new capabilities, including ones that appear really rudimentary and pretty simplistic, but actually could be proven to be quite effective. But the most important point is they felt bold enough to fly this thing, entering over Idaho, through Montana, the Midwest of the United States. I mean, literally cut a diagonal path right across the middle of the continental U.S. That's never happened before. And then, obviously exiting off the East Coast, and felt like they didn't have anything to fear about it. And it was, in many ways, in my view, it was sending a message for the world. And that is, look, we can fly these things over airspace of the United States, and they can't and won't do anything about it. So what makes you think they're going to do anything anywhere in the world? They're a hollow superpower. That's the Chinese argument. That's the point they're making tonight to the world.
It does seem like an obvious dominance move. So the Biden administration was saying, well, we only had a very narrow window to shoot it down off the coast of South Carolina because then it would drift in international waters, at which point we were bound by something called international law. I mean, the Chinese broke the law by flying it over our country. So why would the Biden administration be caught up in the minutia of international law, which is kind of a meaningless concept? Why wouldn't they shoot down where they felt like it? It's our country.
Well, that's a great question, and one they should answer. I mean, the trajectory of it was pretty clear by early to late last week to early last week. Early last week to late the week before. You could tell the trajectory that it was coming. They were tracking it. They knew it actually went over Canada for a brief period of time as well. And that's also NORAD territory. So they had multiple options to bring it down. Look, I'm not saying detonate this thing over a major U.S. city or a populated area. This thing's the size of 3, city buses. That lands in the wrong place, it's going to hurt people. But they had other options to bring it down. And by the way, the Chinese could have also moved this thing. They didn't feel like they needed to. This thing probably has a self-destruct mechanism on it that allows it to self-destruct if necessary. They didn't feel any need to do that. So ultimately, I think that this, to me, is just one more example of, hopefully, look, it's a balloon, but I hope it wakes people up to the fact that we are now engaged, if the people don't realize it already, in a full-scale geopolitical competition with the Chinese, and they're playing to win, and we're over here messing around with a lot of silly stuff and back talk that isn't addressing the fundamental issue of the 21st century.
Yeah, self-destructive and weak. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tuck.
So several years ago, we reported how the FAA had decided to hire air traffic controllers on the basis of equity criteria, not on the basis of who would be a good air traffic controller. Now they're doing that with pilots too. So you're really shocked to learn there was yet another near collision between two commercial aircraft at a major airport. Pete Buttigieg, who's supposed to be in charge of all of this, didn't notice. He was too busy celebrating Transit Equity Day. We've got details next. Mayor Pete is out there celebrating Transit Equity Day. Happy Transit Equity Day, by the way. Meanwhile, there's been yet another near disaster at a major airport. Fox's Trace Gallagher has a story for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Happened in Austin, Tucker. This was a FedEx 767. It was cleared to land in Austin on the same runway that a Southwest Airlines 737 was cleared to take off on. The flight tracking system, Flight Radar, says at one point the planes were less than 1,000 feet apart. Now, the FedEx plane was at an altitude of 75 feet before pulling up and avoiding the collision. But here's the deal. A 767 lands at 180 miles per hour. That is 280 feet per second, which means at At one point, the planes were less than 4 seconds away from colliding. It's interesting that the air traffic controllers told the Southwest plane to abort takeoff and get off the runway, but instead, the Southwest pilot said negative and got airborne instead. The NTSB is investigating, but we are still waiting for more information on that near miss that happened last month at JFK between a Delta Airlines plane and an American Airlines plane, also only about 1,000 feet apart. Meantime, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has not commented on the near collision, though he did comment on Transit Equity Day, which was happening at the very same time the planes in Austin almost collided. Watch.
I love that image of the doors opening on the bus or the subway car, representing doors opening in so many other areas of life, if you can get to where you need to be in an equitable way.
Comforting. Tucker, back to you.
Trace Gallagher with that report. Thanks so much.
You bet.
Well, there's really no institution in American life that had higher trust than healthcare and now has lower trust after a couple of years of COVID. The entire sector has been gravely discredited for obvious reasons if you've lived here since 2020. But what's interesting is that very few people who work in the healthcare sector seem to understand this, and certainly no one has apologized. We bring in tonight one notable exception. Kevin Bass is a medical researcher. We don't know what his politics are. He doesn't seem like a right-winger or anything at all. But he just wrote one of the remarkable pieces we've seen this year in Newsweek, admitting that his entire business got it wrong. It's time for the scientific community to admit we were wrong about COVID and it cost lives. God knows what the effect of that level of honesty will be on his career, but in the meantime, we're happy to have him join us now. Kevin Bass. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for writing this piece, which I want to recommend to everyone. Totally non-political. Again, I don't even know what your politics are. I assume you're liberal, but you're honest in this piece. Why were you moved to write this?
Well, for many of the reasons that you discussed, that I realized that we have lost trust in this country as a healthcare industry from the ordinary person. Anybody who knows, anybody who's watching the media, anybody who is on social media and is talking to ordinary people realizes just how angry so many ordinary people are. And I felt that if I wrote a piece like this, apologizing for, I didn't set policy, but I certainly supported it, and every single day I certainly patted all my friends on the back for supporting it and for thinking the right kinds of thoughts. I thought if I apologized, then at least I was doing my part to make things better. And as we know, change starts one person at a time, so that's why I wrote the piece.
Amen. It's such an honorable and difficult thing to do. I was so very impressed by your piece for exactly that reason. If we're going to say change starts one person at a time, the first thing we should all do is apologize for what we've done wrong, but no one ever does. Did you, and again, we don't have time to go through all the different things, but you basically hit everything from masks to vaccines to the lockdowns. Are you worried, since you're a younger man, still in school, are you worried about the effect of this piece on your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm saying something that's not going to be very popular. A lot of people don't understand this point of view. When you talk to especially a lot of older individuals, including some people I admire greatly for all sorts of other different reasons, including great scientists, they often don't understand what I'm doing. And so, but some of the younger generation does, and there are many people within the healthcare industry who do understand. So I think if I just speak the truth, which is what I'm trying to do, just speak the truth, and I do so with a pure heart, that's what I'm here to do.
I wonder why this hasn't occurred, and again, for the third time, bless you for doing it, but I wonder why it hasn't occurred to senior people in this business, maybe people who ran, I don't know, our medical agencies, to do the same. I mean, that would do a lot for the country, don't you think?
I think it would do, it is a necessary thing to happen for this country, for us to have a reckoning about this particular issue so that we can restore trust. People will remember this for the rest of their lives. I think the reason that the people who are in charge of these institutions don't do such a thing is because they're surrounded by a bunch of people who all think very similar to them. They're not really being exposed to ordinary people on a regular basis. They're in an echo chamber. They're patting each other on the back all the time. And for that reason, they can't see anything but their own perspective. In fact, it's been politicized. So everybody with the other perspective is in the other political party. So then you have the whole other dimension where actually alternative views get demonized. So it's they're entrenched, and there's a lot of polarization. So I think that's the reason. It's going to take a long time.
Can't come too soon, and yours is the first step of this piece. Kevin Bass, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So there are some moments where people just pull off the mask and show you who they are. Pfizer sponsoring open Satan worship at the Grammy Awards seems like one of them. Can you do that without consequences? I don't know. I guess we're going to find out. We've got the whole story coming up next. So the point of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as you often heard, is to wind up with a leadership class that, quote, looks like America. Now, we think you should hire on the basis of merit, but that's kind of an appealing idea. The people who run the country should look like the country. But that's not what it's about at all. Because no administration has ever looked less like America, just by the numbers, than the Biden administration. It's not about making the administration look like America. It's about discriminating against certain classes of people who don't vote for them. Period. And now it's provable. Jeremy Carl at the Claremont Institute just ran the numbers, and this is in the judiciary. He found that out of 97 federal judges confirmed under Joe Biden, total number of white men, 5. 22 are black women. So this is race-based hiring. It's illegal, but it's also not about looking like America. It's about punishing people. And it's also incidentally, or maybe not incidentally, producing nominees for federal judgeships who know nothing about the Constitution, like this person.
Judge on the far end. Tell me what Article 5 of the Constitution does.
Article 5 is not coming to mind at the moment.
Okay. How about Article 2?
Neither is Article 2.
So she doesn't know what's in the Constitution, but she's going to be a federal judge whose job it is to interpret the law against the Constitution. Okay. So degrading. Horace Cooper is the co-chairman of Project 21. He's also a lawyer who knows what's in the Constitution. Horace, thanks so much for coming on. By the way, I'm not a lawyer. I don't even have a successful background in academia, and I knew what those were. So, like, that's pretty bad, right? Why is this not on the front page of the New York Times?
Well, it should have been, Tucker. You know, I actually taught an Article 1 course all about the legislative process at George Mason University. And it's important that people understand what the options, what the authorities, what the powers that our founders granted our Congress, our federal legislature. And we had an entire course focused on that. But George Mason, like other good schools, wants quality graduates. We want talented graduates, and we're interested in seeing to it that the people who leave with a degree are masters of the topic. What we're seeing from the Biden administration, and which is what we're seeing generally from the progressive movement, is this idea that we just need to reshape the judiciary in a way under color. I use that term in a duplicative way. By pretending that we're making the courts look more like America, but the truth of the matter is we're finding people, they aren't talented, they aren't highly skilled, but they know progressive vision just like the back of their hand.
Right. Well,
that's the ultimate goal of what's happening here. Not excellence. And America suffers, corporations suffers, defendants suffer.
Well, and it's just so unbelievably degrading, I think, for the whole country. It's the opposite of excellence. And I appreciate your saying so. Horace Cooper, great to see you. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we set up this independent judiciary as a way for every American, instead of self-help, which is the nasty way of saying I'm not going to rely on the legal or the justice system, our founders set up this independent judiciary so that we can get people to voluntarily agree to bring their disputes there. I don't want the cardiologist to be chosen by his color. I don't want the pilot to be chosen by his race. And I don't want the judiciary to be chosen that way. We need excellence. And this administration doesn't want that.
Amen. Great to see you tonight. Thank you, Horace.
Thank you.
So really, at the core, no one says it, but it's true. At the core of the Democratic program is race hatred. Obviously, the party of Jim Crow is still at it. They never really changed. They just call it equity now. Florida State University, completely controlled by the left, has just adopted a series of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs to promote bigotry openly, castigates believing Christians for their Christian privilege. There's no Christian privilege in this country, by the way. The school also offers a racially segregated scholarship that bars white students from applying, which is illegal, but it's also race hatred. What's another word for it? There isn't one. It's race hatred. But this is everywhere. Chris Rufo tirelessly is on this. He broke this story. He's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. He joins us tonight. Chris, thanks so much for coming on. So I just have to ask you once again, how is this, which is so obviously illegal under federal and state laws, all 50 states, how is this allowed?
Well, it shouldn't be, but it's allowed because these are people who have power. They've expanded in the universities with these so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and no one is challenging them from within the institution. And so that's why I'm doing this investigative series. I'm exposing it. We're going to put pressure on these folks because what they're doing is quite simple. They're dividing Americans, or in this case, students at Florida State, along what they call a matrix of oppression. They're designating some groups oppressors, other groups oppressed, and they're creating special benefits and special punishments based on your identity. It's wrong. We have them scrambling, and the more we expose it, the more we put pressure on them, the more that we can stamp out this racialist ideology that is capturing all of our institutions.
Well, and it's just, it's directly opposed to the America that normal people want to live in, of all colors, by the way. You're not prepared for this. I'm just throwing this at you. I just read today that you've been appointed to the board of a college by Governor DeSantis in Florida. And in a minute 30, can you sum up what it's a very interesting story? Can you sum up what you're doing and what that is?
Yeah, I was appointed along with 6 other trustees to take over the new College of Florida. It's the smallest public university in the system. On our first board meeting, we fired the president. We let go of the general counsel. We switched the board chair. And we're going to implement top to bottom reforms at this university. We're going to be bringing a classical liberal arts education and demonstrating it's time for conservatives to get tough. It's time for when we win elections to actually start changing institutions. And we're not just simply going to be the caretakers of left-wing ideology. We're taking action. Governor Ron DeSantis is leading the way, and I'm proud to be part of this movement.
So you're not waiting around for a report from the current administration at this college?
No, we're acting very quickly, and I think you're going to see dramatic changes right from the outset. And look, we're following the governor's lead. This is a guy who has a bold vision, takes courageous action, and really the thing that I hope to demonstrate in this experiment, taking over this college, is political courage, because that's what we need as conservatives. It's time to stop just doing white papers, talking to each other. It's time to take action.
You know, John Durham's going to do a report in the next 10 years, so just hold tight. Chris Rufo, great to see you. Now, walls don't work. Walls are racist. You can't have a wall, but the Democratic Party is building one right before the State of the Union. Also, we want to point out that tonight's Transgender Satanism brought to you by Pfizer. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Imagine you're Joe Biden and you're required to give a State of the Union address because it's in the Constitution. So if you're Biden, it would take a lot of brass to stand up on live television and claim the U.S. is better off than it was when you took over. Could you do that? Well, in a little more than an hour, Joe Biden will do that. If only it were true. It's not true. This country is more divided, less self-confident, more confused, and sadder than it's been in living memory. For the first time in generations, we face the actual risk of a world war. Our problems are fixable, but they are profound, and they require the full attention of wise and serious leaders who love the country and who are willing to think beyond the next election. Instead, unfortunately, we've got Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the cast of mediocrities who stand behind them making the actual decisions. So if we had to guess, we would guess that Biden is going to use his speech tonight as yet another opportunity to brag about his victories and blame his failures on others. January 6th, Vladimir Putin. We don't expect a single honest word. We hope we're surprised, but we don't expect to be. In the meantime, here's as close to we can get as a statistical analysis of the actual State of the Union under Joe Biden. Since his predecessor, Donald Trump, gave his final address to the joint session of the Congress, the cost of food staples in the United States, a pretty good measure, has risen by more than 20%. The price of gasoline has gone up by more than 40%, and diesel even higher. Consumer confidence, meanwhile, is the mirror image. It's dropped by 40%. What's risen is credit card debt. That's now at an all-time high, over $1 trillion cumulatively, it is estimated, and homelessness as well. There are now tens of thousands more Americans living on the streets than there were when Joe Biden became president. He'll ignore that fact tonight, guaranteed. What could he say about it? On the other hand, how could he ignore it? But again, he will. Interest rates, meanwhile, have skyrocketed. The number of new home buyers is lower than it's been at any point in modern history. The number of working-age American men who are actually working is now under 68%. Take a look at the graph on your screen. If anything is an emergency, that's an emergency. But it's being ignored. We'll just import new workers. And that's why the southern border of the United States is open tonight, as it has been for 2 years. And because it's open, millions and millions and millions of foreign nationals have streamed across into our country illegally. In many cases, we know nothing about them at all. We can't even imagine how their presence long-term will affect our economy or already strained social services, the ones you've paid for your entire life. You think healthcare is in shambles now? Go ahead and visit an emergency room in 5 years. Good luck getting treatment. But the real cost to the country is in social cohesion. This is just too many new people. Doesn't matter whether they're good people or bad people, they're strangers. And there are too many of them. There is no chance we could assimilate all of them. And at this point, we have enough problems with our social fabric all on our own. Here's one measure. In March of 2020, 31% of Americans told Gallup that they, quote, worried a great deal about race. When Joe Biden took office, that number went up to nearly 50%. And of course, it's all the administration talks about, race. Race is not a solvable condition. It's genetic. It never changes. So if you focus on it, ultimately you'll make people hate each other. And that's what's happening. That might make you anxious about the future. But of course, our future is education. All of us have heard that since birth in this country. So how are our schools doing under Joe Biden? Well, here's one measure. The national average ACT score in 2022 hit its lowest level in more than 3 decades. SAT scores have gone down too. Now, just over 40% of all test takers, 40% meet or exceed standards in reading, writing, and math. Test results in certain cities are even worse. In Baltimore, for example, at least 23 schools have not a single student, not one student in the whole school, proficient in math. So how has the Biden administration responded to this? Are there alarms going off in the education department? No. Schools are just failing to measure the failure. They're getting rid of standardized tests up and down the chain, including Harvard, which just made them optional. The American Bar Association says law students don't even need to take the LSAT anymore because tests are racist. So there's a lot of concern, expressed concern about racial justice and equity. Has that helped people? Well, it's made a few people very rich. The ladies who run Black Lives Matter have a lot of houses. But how are ordinary people doing? Are they better off for all of it? No. Life expectancy in the United States has continued to decline for all races, black and white Americans. It's now at its lowest level, life expectancy, in over 25 years. Now, that's not just due to COVID. Those numbers have been declining every year for the past 4 years. Suicides up roughly 5% that we know of. Overdose deaths up more than 50% since before the pandemic. Alcohol deaths up more than 30%. Now, these aren't so much medical problems as they are famously deaths of despair. And what's jarring is that there doesn't seem to be an option for many Americans. A lot of people in this country don't think they can be saved. Church membership has just dropped below 50% for the first time ever in the history of this country. So it's a sad, secular country with decreasing reservoirs of hope. And military enlistment is a pretty good measure of how people feel about that. The Pentagon has fallen short of its enlistment targets by 25%. That's more than 15,000 recruits. So what's growing and thriving in this country under Joe Biden? Well, weed dispensaries are. They're popping up everywhere, and the Biden administration is encouraging this. That's the Biden economy. Weed dispensaries backed by private equity. Cannabis sales have exploded in this country, gone from $12 billion to more than $30 billion a year. So we're building back better. We're building a lot of weed dispensaries. It's not exactly what we were promised. We'll stop the analysis there, but you get the point. The question is, what will Biden say about all of this? Now, an honest man who cared about the country would identify the problems honestly so we could solve them. Take responsibility for some, shift the blame on others. That's okay. But tell us the truth. If people are dying younger, killing themselves, living on the street, if credit card debt is at an all-time high, you can't tell us the State of the Union is strong. And if you can't tell us that, then we can't fix it. Charlie Hurt is the opinion editor of the Washington Times. He joins us tonight. Charlie, great to see you. So again, Biden doesn't have a choice since the Constitution prescribes this speech. But I mean, what could you say if you were him? Could you really get up and say the State of the Union is strong thanks to me?
I think he will do his best. We will see that. That's exactly what we will see tonight, because this is a man who is a creature of Washington. He has been here for over 50 years. It's the only job he's ever had, which is pretty remarkable considering that he's a millionaire today based on a government salary for his entire adult life and his wife's school teacher's salary. How many government workers married to a school teacher out there own multiple vacation homes and are millionaires many times over? That's who this is. So I expect him to go full bore on claiming that the State of the Union is good, and you did an excellent job of sort of ticking through all of those things. But the two just two things that I would focus on. One is the big picture constitutional aspect of all of this. This man, more than any president in our history, has surrendered American sovereignty. We no longer have a southern border. He's completely given it up. He doesn't even care about it. He's and to the point that he doesn't even care about our sovereignty when it comes to our own airspace. He's given it all up, doesn't care, and it's all part of a political scheme on his part. The second thing I would point to is his foreign policy chops. This is a guy who is the greatest foreign policy expert Washington has ever seen, and he alone allowed the situation where Russia invaded Ukraine. And that tells you about all you need to know about the state of our country under this guy.
I think that's a fair assessment. Charlie Hurt of the Washington Times, great to see you tonight.
Great to see you.
So it's one thing to preside over measurable decline of a country. Biden has done that. But why humiliate the country? Why rub it in their faces? Why scream to them in their right on television? You're weak. You deserve no defense. Well, that is effectively what the administration did this and last week by allowing a Chinese spy balloon, Chinese military aircraft, to cross over the entire continental United States. Biden may brag tonight that they shot it down over South Carolina, but really, he's likely not to say much about it, actually, according to one administration official. We will see. Chris Bedford is executive editor of Common Sense Society. He joins us to assess. It's almost too painful. It just happened 2 days ago, but it's almost too painful to remember the fact that the Biden administration let this happen. What do you think he says about it tonight?
I don't expect him to want to talk about it at all, unless maybe he's going to brag that they shot it down while it surveyed important installations in the Atlantic Ocean. He let it go over actual important U.S. military installations, and he did it, it seems, because he didn't want to ruin a diplomatic trip to China. And that's the action of a weaker country. That's something that maybe Kenya would want to avoid embarrassment before the United States arrived there, because the United States is the more powerful country and that kind of thing. And that situation they put us in with China. But the balloon on its own is really just a symbol of what's actually going on with the Chinese relationship with America. Until just a few years ago, China was manufacturing the drones the Department of Interior used to survey our land. You can guarantee there was spy software on that. There are tens of thousands of Chinese spies in our universities and our corporations. None of them are being deported. None of them are being interrogated or investigated. There are actual Chinese police stations in our cities, including in Manhattan, that are only getting raided after journalists expose them, and Chinese apps are spying on our children with TikTok. So our relationship can really be summed up by this balloon thing, which is a weaker state that is not challenging China. Will they actually take serious spying operations on us?
I mean, there's been this debate for years about what we do about Taiwan if they move against Taiwan. I think there are two legitimate sides. Personally, I think there are two legitimate sides to that debate. But allowing a Chinese military aircraft to hover over your country for a week, I mean, that's as clear a statement as you could make about your beta position, is it not?
It is, and all those politicians who yell loudest about Taiwan are the ones who never want to deal with the actual problems, what China's doing in this country right now.
Wow. Wow, is that an insightful point? Spoken by someone who lives in Washington. You know how it works. Chris Bedford, thank you so much. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Did you watch the State of the Union address last night? We do not blame you if you took a pass on that. Tuning in was a grim task. 80-year-old Joe Biden shuffling stiff-legged and bewildered to the podium, a husk held together by Botox and enough amphetamines from the White House doctor to read the slogans written for him by unelected Obama acolytes who actually run the government. This is our president, ladies and gentlemen. It's always pretty hard to believe when you see it. The whole scene is so awful, so degrading to our once proud country, it cannot end soon enough. But the moment was, we will confess, at times pretty amusing. At one point, the eminent TV doctor, Dr. Jill, who really ought to have her own show on Bravo dispensing sassy and empowering medical advice, walked over to Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, and kissed him deeply, square in the mouth without a mask, something that never, ever happens at his house. What was that about? There was an unmistakable 1970s suburban Connecticut Tea Party vibe to it. Kind of a John Cheever story, old school stuff, except they let bystanders film the whole thing. So clearly these people are exhibitionists too, not tea. There's a lot going on behind the scenes in the Biden administration, a lot of which we don't want to know more about. But where do these people find the time for hijinks? Dr. Jill, for example, is extremely, extremely busy, way busier than you are. According to her husband, Dr. Jill is working day and night to drag this country out of its medieval ignorance. And that's not an easy task. Watch.
Jill, my wife, who teaches full-time, has an expression. I hope I get it right, kid. Any nation that out-educates us is going to out-compete us.
Wait a second. Dr. Jill is teaching, quote, full-time? How many hours a week is full-time? And where is this happening? What school or university or madrasa is she teaching at? What is she teaching? Can we sign up for her class? How come we didn't know any of this until last night? Any nation that out-educates us is going to out-compete us, says Dr. Jill, and that's a fair point. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Bravo, Dr. Jill, bravo! The question is, how shall we as a nation respond to Dr. Jill's clarion call for action? Obviously, you need to shut down the schools for an entire year because unionized teachers feel like longer vacations, and then get rid of all standardized tests because racism. That's the solution. It turns out that Dr. Jill, who, like an awful lot of community college geniuses from Delaware who've received advanced degrees in, quote, education, she has an awful lot of good ideas. We ought to listen to her more. Unfortunately, we don't often get the chance because she's always teaching. So that really was the highlight of the evening, Dr. Jill making out with the vice president's husband, and then Joe Biden bragging about a job she doesn't actually have. Pretty hard not to find that funny. And then there was Biden himself. Now, the president's mental condition is either scary and depressing, deeply alarming, or absolutely hilarious, depending upon your mood. Last night, for lack of other entertainment options, we decided to find it funny. So take in this steaming pile of word puree and see if you can make sense of it.
As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did. But in the past 2 years, democracies have become stronger, not weaker. Autocracy has grown weaker, not stronger. Name me a world leader who changed places with Xi Jinping. Name me one. Name me one.
We shot down their balloon. So name me a world leader who can decipher what Joe Biden just said. Name me one. See, you can't. Friends, democracy is winning tonight. Now, we have no idea what any of that means any more than Xi Jinping does, but the trained seals in the crowd loved it. They clapped consistent with their species. Actually, sorry, that is unfair to seals. There's not a seal in the ocean, or even at SeaWorld, who would wear an I love abortion pin. That is too low even for marine mammals. They may eat live fish, but they're not ghouls. Congressional Democrats, by contrast, are ghouls. Take a look at this pin, which has replaced the American flag on their lapels. Notice that the O in abortion is in the shape of a heart. They literally love abortion. Now, let's set aside the politics and ask an honest question. Who loves abortion? Honestly, who loves abortion? Maybe you think abortion should be legal, but do you love abortion? Do you think abortion is a wonderful, affirming act you feel so proud of? You brag about it with jewelry? If you feel that way, you should know that you are not defending a medical procedure. You wouldn't say that about an appendectomy. No. You are promoting an ancient religious rite called human sacrifice. That's what this is, promoting human sacrifice. Let's stop lying about it. It's very obvious now. And speaking of death cults, Joe Biden made his case last night for the sexual mutilation of children.
It's also passed the Bipartisan Equality Act to ensure LGBTQ Americans, especially transgender young people, can live with safety and dignity.
First, you want to say, whoa, whoa, pause, Mr. President. Define every letter in the acronym and what they all mean. Of course, he couldn't. But he is pointing to an occurring reality in our country. There are hospitals in the United States, hard as it is to believe, that are right now performing mastectomies on little girls in the name of gender ideology. They're castrating children and then giving them drugs that produce sterility and osteoporosis. And they're bragging about it. Now, this has happened with adults for a long time. It's never happened at scale with children, and no one's ever bragged about it. But the Democratic Party now is, not just endorsing it, not just supporting it silently, by calling it an affirmative good. Joe Biden, the guy who showered with his daughter, causing her to develop sexual compulsions as an adult, calls the sexual mutilation of children safety and dignity. That's dark, really dark. But it got worse, actually. The humor stopped and the darkness descended. Joe Biden proceeded to talk about the recent death of Tyree Nichols in Memphis. Now, you'll remember that he was killed by 5 police officers, all of whom were black, as was he. So the takeaway from that episode may be worth knowing about, but it has nothing to do with race, at least not directly. Everyone was the same color. And yet last night, Joe Biden used that sad episode with Tyree Nichols' family present in the room to advance the lie, the one you hear so often, that the white middle class is the single greatest threat to America, and especially to black people. Watch this.
Most of us in here have never had to have the talk that brown and black parents have had to have with their children. Bo, Hunter, Ashley, my children, I never had to have the talk with them. I never had to tell them if a police officer pulls you over, turn your interior lights on right away. Don't reach for your license. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. Imagine having to worry like that every single time your kid got in a car.
Now, it is fair that they don't worry like that in the Biden family. Both of Biden's surviving children have had run-ins with the police repeatedly. Hunter Biden left a crack pipe and his ID in a rental car, but no one ever followed up on it because he was the son of a powerful politician. Maybe Joe Biden should be grateful for that, but it's not a racial issue. But he's saying that it is. The police, African Americans, are trying to murder you because you're black. That's unifying the country. Police are responsible for all the violence in black communities. That's his message. Now, that is not only a lie, provably a lie, because reliable statistics exist. It's a lie that's caused a lot of people, including a lot of black Americans, to die over the last 3 years because police in many places have stopped enforcing the law and in others have simply quit, and they're replaced by total mediocrities and crazy violent people like the cops who beat Tyree Nichols to death in Memphis. How do you think they got that job? Because normal people quit. That's why. Because they didn't want to work in an industry that's under attack unfairly from the President of the United States. And now Joe Biden is repeating that lie. And on and on and on. At one point, he claimed January 6th was an active insurrection, and that it was an insurrectionist, not a hippie nudist with a BLM sign outside his home who attacked Paul Pelosi last year. Do you remember that?
The last few years, our democracy has been threatened and attacked, put at risk, put to the test in this very room on January the 6th. And then just a few months ago, an unhinged big lie, assailant unleashed a political violence, the home of the then Speaker of the House of Representatives. using the very same language the insurrectionists used as they stalked these halls and chanted on January 6th.
The insurrectionists. People who were justly upset because they felt that the 2020 election was not on the level, which it was not, by the way, which it was not. And we know that for a fact now that we've seen the Twitter files, which prove that the big tech companies took a side in that election. We didn't have a free and fair election, certainly not a free press. But people who are upset about that are now insurrectionists. Nonviolent protesters are insurrectionists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the lies just kept coming, to the point where it was deeply frustrating to watch. At one point, Biden claimed that NATO was fighting against Putin's aggression, even though we now know, thanks to the Israeli prime minister, that it was NATO, the United States in other words, that prevented a truce from being signed between Russia and Ukraine last year. As Joe Biden said that, a lie, Mitch McConnell clapped and smiled wearing his Ukraine flag tie. But maybe the most egregious lie is one that affects every American. Biden claimed that our economy could not be doing better because he's an economic wizard. Watch this.
We're better positioned than any country on earth right now, but we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months.
So those were very specific claims about the economy, a lot of which is easy to measure. So we thought we would bring in someone who understands the economy, who's covered it for decades, and that would be Charlie Gasparino, a senior correspondent at Fox Business. He joins us now. Charlie, thanks so much for coming on. So let's just, if we could, stick to his claims about the economy. And they did seem specific. If you were just paying half attention, you would think, wow, he's got it under control. Were those accurate claims?
I mean, it's accurate that that stuff is coming down, like inflation is coming down. The question is, and jobs are going up. The question is, does he have any responsibility for it? And, you know, listen, I watched it. I fell asleep halfway through. I definitely read the entire speech. It's delusional in its grandiosity is the best way to put it. Listen, inflation, Ron Klain and Joe Biden don't control interest rates. The Federal Reserve does. And the Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates to calm inflation. It has nothing to do with Joe Biden and Ron Klain and whoever's running things in the White House. Joe Biden and Ron Klain or whoever's running things in the White House caused inflation by spending gazillions of dollars that didn't need to be spent. We should point out that the economy was pretty damn good when he took over. He was handed not something like Obama was handed, which was the post-financial crisis economy. He was handed an improving economy and a waning pandemic. There is almost nothing that this guy did to improve the economy. As a matter of fact, he made it worse. The reason why his approval ratings are so lousy is because even though we have very low unemployment, the purchasing power of the average person, the working class or middle class American, has gone down because of inflation, and that's on his back. And it's not a great economy if you can work 40 hours a week. Yes, you got a good job, but guess what? You're spending much more money to put food on the table, put gas in your car, and that's the Joe Biden economy. And that's why, you know, he's lucky. My view, he's lucky that the Republicans can't find their way here. I mean, it's a mess in the Republican Party because he really is, on the record, based on the facts, a lousy president, particularly when it comes to the economy.
The worst of our lifetime. Meanwhile, Republicans are thinking about how to cut Social Security. Right. You got to think some of them secretly do work for the Democratic Party. It seems that way to me. What do I know?
They're behind the scenes, Maybe they like Joe Biden, Maybe they think he's a funny guy. By the way, what a nasty person last night.
I know.
I mean, could you get any nastier than that?
No. Vicious. Especially on your way. You're 80 years old.
Yeah.
Why not spread a little kindness? Try to unify the country, not demonize half of it.
Think about that. Unifying the country. Yep. What an awful concept.
Charlie Gasparino, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Type Tucker.
So for people living in this country, the drug crisis is of paramount concern. It's being driven by our open southern border, but its effects are everywhere. People have kids who are dying. Go to any city, there are people on their way to dying, lying on the street. So the fentanyl crisis, the drug crisis more broadly, but specifically the fentanyl crisis, should be really the whole speech. Biden, by contrast, mentioned it only briefly, took no responsibility for it, never even acknowledged that the open border has driven it. Here's what he did say.
Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. You got it.
Yeah, what was that applause? But drug ODs are not the only consequence of the open border, though they're probably the biggest. In some places along the border, U.S. citizens are literally being forced to defend their property from people here illegally from foreign countries who show up on their land. And by the way, if you have a human right given by God, defended hopefully by the U.S. government, it's the right to protect your family, your life, and your property from invaders. If someone shows up on your land and threatens you, you have a right to use deadly force, period. And if you don't have that right, you're a slave. So this played out in Arizona recently, where a 73-year-old rancher called George Allen Kelly shot an illegal migrant who was trespassing on his property and apparently threatening him. Now, that's legal under Arizona law. It's legal under natural law. And yet police have charged Kelly with first-degree murder. His bail is set at $1 million. By the way, he asked the judge, my wife is home alone, my elderly wife is unprotected in a place that's overrun with foreign nationals here illegally. Can you just let me out so I can protect her? No. What is this? Harmeet Dillon is the chairwoman of the Republican National Lawyers Association, and our friend, she joins us tonight. Harmeet, this seems pretty basic. If you don't have the right to defend your property from anyone threatening you, much less a non-citizen, like what right do you have?
Well, you're absolutely right, Tucker. And under Arizona law, it has a pretty broad law for protecting your property, standing your ground. And that includes the protection and the right to shoot somebody who's breaking into an unoccupied residential structure. So we don't know all the facts surrounding this circumstance, but the person in question who was shot was a repeat player in crossing the border. And the family in question has repeatedly been subjected to migrants crossing their property and presumably threatening them as well. And so hopefully when all the facts are known here, the individual will have a defensible argument to make to the jury about this, or the prosecution may be dropped. But this just highlights the fact that nowhere mentioned in the speech of the president last night was the human toll on American law-abiding citizens and even immigrant communities that are subjected to rampant unlawful immigration. And in fact, thousands of criminals coming across the border every day, threatening Americans and threatening residents of our country. And that tragedy is not just a drug tragedy, but in so many other ways, and it's permeating throughout the United States in a volume of new migrants to this country that in a 2-month period exceeds the population of some states. You're talking about over 200,000 people a month right now in some recent months, and it's staggering. And you just heard the president lie about it yesterday. He minimized it first, but he said we've reduced illegal immigration from certain countries by 97%. He mentioned Cuba, Nicaragua, and a couple of others. The volume has not decreased at all. They've simply legalized it. And so that's how they decreased the illegal nature of that immigration. They simply moved it from one category to another and paroled people. But that's outrageous. That's an outrageous lie, and you don't really see the media calling him on it.
No, and they're committing a crime at scale, and no one says it. Harmeet Dillon, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So San Francisco, as you may have read, is about to vote on whether to give reparations to African Americans in San Francisco, in a state that never had slavery. But the meeting that will determine this has been delayed because one of the main people pushing for reparations wasn't there. He was too busy partying at a Hooters in Columbia. That's a real story. Not Columbia, South Carolina. The country, Columbia. That's how oppressed he is. Here's a story so perfect you think we made it up, but we didn't. The city of San Francisco has set up a commission to create a race-based spoil system called reparations in a state that never had slavery. The plan right now is to give $5 million to every California resident of a certain skin color. So that's humming along, speeding toward dystopia, but it has hit a snag. The latest meeting of the commission was scheduled for Tuesday and had to be postponed for more than a month. Why? Well, one member of the commission, San Francisco Supervisor Shaman Walton, could not make it because he was busy partying in Colombia, the country, and he missed his flight back to California. In photographs he uploaded from the local Hooters, it looks like he was having a lot of fun. Seems like that he's got a lot of privilege, not oppressed at all. But he's not backing down. Walton says as soon as he gets back from Hooters, he'll get back to work on those $5 million checks. And by the way, he'd said he would like his check in $1 bills for the Hooters girls. Who made that part up? But the rest is real. So before the war in Ukraine even began, both Toria Nuland at the State Department, the number 2 at the State Department, and Joe Biden threatened to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. Watch.
I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
So then the pipelines actually blew up. These are the pipelines that bring natural gas from Eastern Europe to Western Europe to keep the European economy going. And they exploded, causing the single largest human-caused environmental disaster in all of history. And again, setting Europe on the road to actual poverty. So it was an unpopular event, and Joe Biden denied any responsibility. In fact, he blamed Russia. Joe Biden and his whole administration told us that somehow Russia, for reasons they never made clear, just because they're evil, had sabotaged their own energy pipeline. Watch this.
It was a deliberate act of sabotage, and now the Russians are pumping out disinformation and lies.
So that was in September, and it was obvious from the very first day, well, that's not true. It's not that Vladimir Putin is too good a person to blow up Nord Stream, but like, why would he? It only hurts him. And by the way, it really hurts Western Europe. But a lot of media outlets repeated that lie dutifully. That's what they do, and attacked us as Putin stooges for having questions about it. Well, we know a lot more now. There have been a number of official investigations of what happened, and not one has found any evidence of Russian involvement. And now we have the actual answer to what happened. Oh, the Biden administration did it. For real. Investigative reporter Seymour Hersh, who's been around for more than 50 years, just wrote a piece on Substack that includes this, quote, last June, the Navy divers, U.S. Navy divers, operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22, planted remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. Now, this piece continues. It's probably the most comprehensive news story you will read this year. Seymour Hersh on Substack, you should read it. And it recounts in detail meetings with the National Security Advisor at the White House, where this was planned, exactly what explosives were used, how they were triggered, by what aircraft, on what day. So many details in here that it is not possible that it's not true. It is true. And in fact, no one in the high level in the U.S. government is denying it with any specificity. Instead, the White House is just dismissing it as utterly false, and no reporters are following up on this. Amazing. Aaron Mate is following up on it. He's with the Gray Zone. He joins us tonight. Aaron, I don't remember the last time I saw a story this well reported. It wasn't in the New York Times, Hersh's former employer. They wouldn't have run it. But the fact that nobody at the White House briefing today even asked about this story makes me think we are becoming North Korea.
Tucker, this is a case where you have the motive. The U.S. has long been trying to stop the Nord Stream 2 because, as Cy Hersh's story points out, the U.S. has recognized that if Nord Stream 2 goes online, that would make it a lot more difficult for the U.S. to wage a proxy war against Russia, because Germany will not want to be on board with cutting off its source of cheap energy. So the U.S. found an answer to that problem. They blew it up. And it's interesting. Hersh reports that the planning for this operation began in late 2021. And that's when Russian forces were massing on the border of Ukraine, and there was a threat of the invasion. But something else happened. Russia, in that same month of December 2021, when planning was underway at the White House to blow up Nord Stream 2, Russia also submitted draft treaties to the U.S. and NATO, laying out detailed proposals for the U.S. and NATO to resolve their issues, to roll back NATO military infrastructure in states surrounding Russia. Now, we know what happened to that because the U.S. rejected it, wouldn't even discuss the core issue of Ukraine not joining NATO. Instead, the U.S. chose to basically let the Russian invasion happen, and then when that happened, proceeded to engage in this operation to blow up Nord Stream 2. And they've made no secret about their embrace of this. The day after the Nord Stream 2 was sabotaged, Antony Blinken declared that this was a tremendous strategic opportunity. And most recently, you've covered this, Victoria Nuland testified in Congress that she is grateful, along with the White House, that the Nord Stream 2 is now a hulk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
I mean, NATO is a coalition of European powers led by the United States. The United States just wrecked their economies. I don't see how NATO stays together after this. I don't, but I mean, what do I know? Ermate, I hope you'll come back. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
So Airbnb will ban you if you criticize Joe Biden in an effective way. They'll literally not let you spend the night. But now they've taken it a step further and decided that collective punishment is the answer. Your relatives are banned from Airbnb if you criticize Joe Biden too effectively. That just happened to a filmmaker in Canada who joins us next. Lauren Southern is an author and a filmmaker, and some of her views are considered offensive by the neoliberals in charge of everything. For example, she thinks unrestricted illegal immigration probably not that good for your country. And because of that, big tech has decided to make it impossible for her to live in the West. Airbnb has refused to allow her to stay in any of its properties without explaining why. By the way, if you have a felony record, you could probably stay at an Airbnb. But now Airbnb has decided to take a close look at Lauren Southern's family. Because her parents are related to her by blood, the genetics are incriminating, and her parents are no longer allowed to stay at Airbnb, a common practice in North Korea. So we reached out to Airbnb and its head of public policy, former Obama official Jay Carney, and Airbnb claimed this was just a mistake. But of course it wasn't a mistake, because they explained that they were doing it because these people are close to Lauren Southern in their email. This is the company, by the way, that banned January 6th defendants. Lauren Southern remains banned by Airbnb. She joins us today. Lauren, thanks so much for coming on. So, I mean, what kind of world is it where not just the thought criminal, but the thought criminal's family is banned from spending the night? What is that?
There's definitely been a Pandora's box opened in the culture war. I think progressives have realized with the laws we have in place defending civil liberties, they can't quite bring a social credit system in yet. So they've found a way to circumvent it through the corporate class. They can just impose a social credit system on us using big tech.
Do you think your parents will be allowed to buy food or receive medical care since you're against illegal immigration?
In the next few years, who knows, honestly. This is escalating at such a rate I never could have expected. Of course, Airbnb have reversed their decision for now, claiming they are very sorry. But I think we both know the only thing they're sorry for is bad PR and that they were trending on Twitter last night.
Well, I mean, and they admitted it. In their communication to your parents, they said your connection to Lauren Southern makes you ineligible. So I wonder if you were like a convicted armed robber, would they do this to your parents? Of course, they would not even consider it, right?
They don't even treat the families of Epstein and Maxwell like this, right? And what was funny is when they reversed the decision, they claimed in an email to my parents that they had reviewed their appeal. My parents never appealed the decision. So they're attempting to create this phony narrative that it was all a mistake. How do you mistakenly track down an activist's family, mistakenly send them a specific email saying it is because of their relation to me? It makes no sense. They're trying to cover up something nefarious here. And the only reason they aren't continuing to do this to me is because I have a platform and they're testing the waters. If they got away with it this time, they would have kept going. But they miscalculated how woke their market is.
This shouldn't surprise us. These are the same people who attack entire groups of people on the basis of their genetics. Some groups are innocent, some are guilty. I mean, it's classic Nazi race science. You're implicated by your blood. I mean, that's what Airbnb is saying.
Essentially, yes. And I got to say, one of the most disappointing things for me is that it has gotten to this point, that we've spent so many years having Republicans defend cronyism by pretending it is capitalism, and then our failsafe, which was supposed to be progressives who are supposed to question the big corporations when they are discriminatory, specifically on blood and genetics, they're like an ADHD dog that just got distracted by a bone with a pride flag on it and placated entirely. So we're left with just activists on Twitter. Thank goodness your show, you're really holding down the fort for conservatives who want to have their freedoms, but it's just a real shame.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, it's not hard. You shouldn't punish people's parents for thought crimes. I mean, it's like, yeah, that seems an easy one. Lauren Southern, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
The other night, we told you about Florida State University's so-called equity programs, which are, of course, the definition of racism. They discriminate against students on the basis of their skin color, something we had a civil rights movement in order to prevent, but that still takes place. The school awards racially segregated scholarships. White kids cannot get those scholarships. Chris Rufo broke that story. Now Florida State University realizes they have been caught violating the law and decency, and so they've corrected it, quote. The old language in the school's scholarship policy read this way, quote, applicants of the award must be minority students, African American, Hispanic, Asian, or Pacific Islander, Native American. The new language states that the scholarship is, quote, available for all new and currently enrolled graduate students, but that preference may be given to students who are, quote, historically underrepresented. Okay. They always beat you with passive aggression. They never fight you. They just change the words. What does that mean? It means they just move the words around. But they're still violating federal civil rights law. And civil rights law in Florida, the letter and the spirit of it, and decency. But somehow the Civil Rights Division is not interested at the Justice Department. I wonder why. We'll keep on it. Well, Joe Biden's State of the Union had a few awkward moments before it even began. Biden appeared to struggle to walk through the Congress to deliver the talk.
Hi. Sir, how are you feeling tonight? Feeling good. What's the State of the Union? Great shape. Getting better.
Then Dr. Jill and the first gentleman, Doug Emhoff, decided to break into a key party of some kind. They started making out right before the speech. Steamy in a kind of celibate way. And then fussy old Mitt Romney had some stern words for the new Congressman George Santos. You're seeing that exchange on your screen right now. After the speech, Romney called Santos a sick puppy. Said Mitt Romney put a dog on the roof of his car and marched in a BLM rally, and an embarrassment, said Mitt Romney. Well, today, Santos, who we're starting to sympathize with, we got to be honest, responded to Mitt Romney. Watch.
It's not the first time in history that I've been told to shut up and go to the back of the room, especially by people who come from a privileged background. And it's not going to be the last, and I'm never going to shut up and go to the back of the room. And I think it's reprehensible that the senator would say such a thing to me in the demeaning way he said. It wasn't very Mormon of him. That's what I can tell you.
So he's playing the privilege card. Who should we root for here? Nobody. One of them. Jesse Kelly might know. He hosts the Jesse Kelly Show. He joins us now. So it's also great, of course. But who should we be rooting for?
Oh, I'm rooting for George Santos.
Yeah,
like you just pointed out, Tucker, George Santos might be a liar. He might even be a drag queen. I don't know what to believe at this point in time. But George Santos didn't march in a BLM rally just after St. George Floyd died in this country and whip up the narrative that helped burn down American cities and jack our murder rate through the roof. George Santos never did any of that. So if he wants to wear women's panties and put on lipstick, that's his business. Mitt Romney's the one who made my country worse.
Well, I think that's fair. And if you're going to have a fraud contest, and let's go ahead and do that, who's more fraudulent, George Santos or Mitt Romney? Who do you think would win?
Well, I think Mitt Romney is not only a huge fraud. Mitt Romney is one of these people who, there's this comment with the whole Bush-era types. They never look in the mirror and realize that this next generation of ickies that they're always complaining about, they're the reason we have that next generation that's different. Their low-T GOP weakness allowed these communist pieces of trash to wreck our country, tear through everything, and now that there's a new breed that's a little rough around the edges sometimes, they get really uppity about it. Mitt Romney soiling his granny panties because George Santos attended the State of the Union is about the least important thing that I care about.
Well, it's such a fair point. I mean, if you ran everything and then, say, 2 years later, everything started to collapse, wouldn't you wonder if you were implicated in that collapse?
But they never do it, Tucker. They never do it. They never look, and this goes beyond the politicians. It's the old pundits that used to be important. The old publications used to be important. Now no one cares about them or listens to them. They never even have even a moment of self-reflection and where they look in the mirror and say, well, I've been divorced 9 times. Maybe it's me. It never occurs to these people.
It's such a good point. A wise man. Jesse Kelly, thank you so much for coming on.
Be good, boss.
So why do people keep referring to Kamala Harris or Kamala or Carmela or whatever we're calling her now, the vice president, as the real president? You hear that a lot, and it happened even last night after Biden's State of the Union. We've got that next. He thought that Joe Biden's speech last night was bewildering, depressing, and mind-bogglingly dishonest. Kamala Harris really liked it. She went on TV this morning to explain that, yeah, Biden may seem really old, but he's not actually really old. Watch this.
President Biden just turned 80. It looks like he's gearing up for re-election, but a majority of Americans, a majority of Democrats, according to our new poll, say they don't want President Biden to run again. What do you say to them?
I mean, George, I think that age is more than a chronological fact, to be very frank with you.
Age is more than a chronological fact, to be very frank with you. Really? Never good at math, Kamala Harris. So what, if it's not chronological, what kind of fact is age? Metaphysical? What are you even talking about? But Kamala Harris is duty-bound to pretend that Joe Biden is actually in charge. He's really running the country by himself. Over on CBS, Gayle King, who is not paid by the White House, doesn't have to pretend. Watch.
How are you feeling about the job these days that you're doing and people's perception of you on the ticket?
Well, let me first of all say, as the president has said, he intends to run, and if he does, I'll be running with him. As it relates to the work of being vice president, listen, I love the American people.
All right. Thank you for your time, Madam President.
Okay,
I know you've got a lot to do.
It's good to be with you, Gail. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Always good to see you.
If Joe Biden runs, I'll be running over him. I mean, with him. Whatever. Prepositions don't matter. Thank you for your time, Madam President. Oh, the propaganda never ends. We'll see if that actually works. That's it for us tonight. We are out of time, sadly. We'll be back 8 p.m. every night, the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Have the best night with the ones you love. See you tomorrow.